For millions of years, long before Tyrannosaurus rex shattered bones with its bite, and long before Velociraptor flashed its sickle claws across the screen, the world was already ruled by giant reptiles. Some were peaceful plant eaters, but others were powerful hunters that turned ancient forests and floodplains into killing grounds. In that dangerous environment, one plant eater would accidentally become the blueprint for everything people think a dinosaur is. That animal was Iguanodon. At first glance, it seems harmless, a plant-eating dinosaur with a beaked mouth and rows of grinding teeth, but this was no gentle grazer. Iguanodon was massive and muscular, with a heavy tail for balance and strong hind limbs that could drive it into a sudden run. On each hand, it carried a single, dagger-like thumb spike, a short but deadly weapon built from solid bone. In a world filled with apex predators, this herbivore was armed. Many millions of years ago, herds of Iguanodon moved through warm river valleys and dense lowland forests, always under threat. Powerful carnivores with slicing teeth and strong jaws watched from the tree line, waiting for a weak animal or a separated juvenile. Scientists have evidence showing that some meat-eating dinosaurs in these ecosystems were fast, deep-skulled hunters, able to open their jaws wide and tear huge pieces of flesh from large prey. Against such attackers, Iguanodon's size alone was not enough. Instead, survival depended on numbers, awareness, and that brutal thumb spike. An Iguanodon could rear back on its hind legs, lash out with heavy kicks, and drive its spike into the side of a charging predator. Imagine the impact of bone against bone, the sudden shock as a hunter misjudged its target. Could a plant eater really wound one of the most dangerous animals in its environment? In this landscape, it had to try. Yet the greatest twist in Iguanodon's story does not begin in the Cretaceous, but on muddy English roads in the early 1800s. When its fossils were first uncovered, scientists struggled to understand this strange creature. Iguanodon was one of the first 3 dinosaurs ever named, and its remains, along with Megalosaurus and Hylaeosaurus, played an important role in the creation of the word Dinosauria itself. But the animal that helped define all dinosaurs was deeply misunderstood. Early reconstructions placed its main weapon not on the hand, but on the nose, as a horn. For decades, museums and model builders showed Iguanodon as a lumbering, rhino-like reptile, plodding on 4 legs with a spike on its face. Only later did new fossils, including a catastrophic mass grave buried nearly 1,000 feet underground in a Belgian coal mine, force scientists to break this image apart and rebuild it. This episode follows that journey, from Victorian showmen and life-size stone dinosaurs to high-tech reconstructions that reveal just how dangerous Iguanodon's world really was. How did a misunderstood plant eater help create the idea of dinosaurs, and what does its true form tell about life and death in a land of killers? This is not just another entry in a list of giant killers. In a series built around the most dangerous dinosaurs, this episode opens a very different kind of dossier. A plant eater whose impact on science and on survival rivals many of the most powerful predators. Before jaws like Tyrannosaurus or claws like Velociraptor dominated popular imagination, Iguanodon quietly shaped what the word dinosaur even meant. To capture that, this episode is treated as a case file. Iguanodon is examined as if it were the first and most important dinosaur investigation. From the moment its strange teeth were pulled from English rocks, through its changing skeletons, to the last echoes of its name in modern research. Each part of the file focuses on a different angle: origin of discovery, body plan, weapons, enemies, and the scientific arguments that raged around its bones. The story begins with history. In the early 1800s, scattered fossils of large plant-eating reptiles led Gideon Mantell to name Iguanodon, while other remains helped define Megalosaurus and Hylaeosaurus. Together, these animals played an important role in Richard Owen's decision to create a new group, Dinosauria. Yet even as the term was born, the image of Iguanodon was deeply flawed. Its thumb spike was placed on the nose, its posture was guessed, and its life was imagined more than it was understood. From there, the case file moves into anatomy and weapons. Scientists have uncovered skulls that show a powerful beak and dense batteries of grinding teeth, with evidence showing that this herbivore could process tough plants and deliver a surprisingly strong bite. The famous thumb spike, once mistaken for a horn, is re-examined as a close-quarter weapon, anchored to a muscular hand that could rake at attackers. Each bone, each joint, reveals a different kind of defense. Next, the investigation shifts down into deep time, into Iguanodon's real environment. The Dinosaur mine in Belgium exposed around 30 nearly complete skeletons, many buried together, giving evidence of herd behavior on a dramatic scale. Their arrangement, preserved many millions of years after death, suggests coordinated movement, social living, and perhaps mass death in a sudden catastrophe. In this phase, the episode explores predators, landscapes, and climate, asking how a large herbivore survived among apex carnivores. Across these stages, each chapter of the story highlights a new, special ability. From crushing plant material efficiently, to using speed and numbers as protection, to communicating and moving as a group. The final part of the case file returns to legacy, showing how Iguanodon inspired Victorian dinosaur parks, guided early reconstructions, and still shapes modern views of ornithopod dinosaurs. Underneath it all runs a central question that drives the entire episode. How did a supposedly gentle plant eater become one of the most important dinosaurs in history? And could a determined herd of Iguanodon truly stand its ground against the deadliest hunters of its age? That question leads back to muddy lanes and quiet fields in early 1800s England, long before the word dinosaur existed. Country roads were lined with clay pits and small quarries, where carts sank into ruts and laborers cut into the hillsides for brick and building stone. In this changing environment, ordinary workers sometimes uncovered extraordinary objects, strange, heavy pieces of rock filled with patterned cavities that looked disturbingly like bones and teeth. In the county of Sussex, one country doctor began paying close attention to these finds. Gideon Mantell spent his days visiting patients on horseback and his spare hours collecting fossils from road cuttings, quarries, and stream banks. His passion soon drew in his wife Mary Ann, who shared his interest and often accompanied him. According to later accounts, it was Mary Ann who first noticed several unusual teeth lying among rubble near a road where workers had been breaking stone. These teeth did not match the jaws of any known animal from the region. Each crown was diamond-shaped in outline, with a high outer ridge and a series of fine vertical grooves, as if designed to slice and crush at the same time. Under magnification, the enamel showed worn facets where upper and lower teeth had met in powerful grinding motions. In form, they resembled the teeth of a living iguana, but they were far larger, thicker, and built for much stronger forces. The implication was striking. Here was evidence showing that, many millions of years before humans, a giant plant eater with an impressive bite had moved through a very different English landscape. Mantell began to search more intensely. From the same general beds came isolated vertebrae, fragments of jaw, pieces of limb bones, and other scattered remains. None formed a complete skeleton. Each quarry yielded only a handful of clues, separated by layers of sandstone and clay. Scientists have since recognized that this kind of fragmentary preservation is common, but at the time, Mantell faced one of the most difficult reconstruction puzzles in early paleontology. He compared the mysterious teeth with those of modern reptiles and mammals, laying iguana jaws beside his fossils and tracing their outlines. The similarities convinced him that the animal was an enormous reptile adapted to eating plants. Yet the body behind the teeth remained almost entirely unknown. How long were its limbs? Did it crawl like a lizard or stand higher with a deep chest and massive tail? Every new bone hinted at great size and strength, but the overall form stayed hazy. Without a modern concept of dinosaurs, Mantell was effectively trying to assemble a monster from a handful of weathered pieces. The teeth suggested a giant herbivore, the vertebrae hinted at a heavy muscular frame, and the environment pointed to lush ancient forests. But how accurate was the picture in his mind? As more fossils emerged and rival scientists entered the debate, that uncertain outline of Iguanodon would be stretched, twisted, and for a time, dramatically wrong. That early outline needed a name, and in the 1820s, a single tooth would decide what kind of creature this giant became in the human imagination. Gideon Mantell studied the strange leaf-shaped crown again and again, comparing its ridges and wear patterns to every reptile available. One match stood out. The closest living analog was the tooth of a modern iguana. Mantell noticed that the basic shape was almost the same, but enlarged to a massive scale. The tiny iguana tooth, only a few millimeters long, had the same serrated edges and broad grinding surface. The fossil version was more than 20 times larger, built for a powerful bite into tough plants. From this comparison, he coined a name that sounded precise and scientific, yet carried a hidden assumption. Iguanodon, from iguana and the Greek odon for tooth, literally, iguana tooth. That choice of name did more than describe a fossil. It framed the entire animal as a scaled-up lizard. If the teeth looked like those of an iguana, then, many reasoned, the body must have been like an iguana as well, only bigger, heavier, and more imposing. Early artists drew Iguanodon as a low-slung, sprawling reptile, with its belly close to the ground, the tail dragging behind, and the limbs splayed out to the sides. In these scenes, it crawled through swamps like a monstrous lizard, slow and ponderous, rather than a dynamic, tail-balanced dinosaur. Scientists have recovered much stronger evidence showing that its real posture was very different, but that understanding came later. At first, the name itself pushed thinking in a particular direction. It encouraged reconstructions that emphasized scales, cold-blooded movement, and a heavy lizard-like body plan. How much did that early label delay the realization that these animals were active, possibly herd-living dinosaurs, rather than oversized reptiles? In reality, the creature behind the name lived many millions of years before humans in the early Cretaceous period, roughly 126 to 125 million years ago. Its environment included warm floodplains, river systems, and forests, where early flowering plants were beginning to spread. Giant reptiles still dominated land and sea, from large carnivorous dinosaurs to marine plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs, and Iguanodon moved among them as one of the most important large plant eaters of its time. The name Iguanodon also played an important role in a much larger scientific story. Alongside Megalosaurus and Hylaeosaurus, it became one of the first 3 dinosaurs formally named from fossils. Richard Owen later used these 3 genera as the foundation for a new group he called Dinosauria in 1842, arguing that they formed a distinct, powerful lineage with strong limbs and specialized bones. Yet beneath that achievement, a deeper question remained. What happens when the very name of an animal locks scientists into the wrong mental picture? And how long does it take for new evidence to break that first impression apart? That first impression took shape not in a quarry or a muddy field, but in the drawing rooms and lecture halls of Victorian London. At the center of that world stood Richard Owen, a rising scientific star with powerful patrons, sharp intellect, and an even sharper sense of ambition. While Gideon Mantell worked in relative obscurity in the provinces, balancing medical practice with late-night fossil study, Owen moved through museums and elite societies where reputations were made. Mantell's life was marked by financial strain, ill health, and long, exhausting fossil hunts along country roads. His iguanodon teeth and bones were stored in cramped rooms and modest collections. In contrast, Owen had access to the grand halls of the Royal College of Surgeons and the British Museum. This contrast in environment mattered. It meant that Mantell provided much of the raw evidence, while Owen controlled the stage on which that evidence would be interpreted for the public. In 1842, Owen took center stage. Drawing heavily on Mantell's Iguanodon, along with Megalosaurus and Hylaeosaurus, he announced a new natural group, Dinosauria, the terrible lizards. Scientists have long recognized that this single act played an important role in shaping how dinosaurs were imagined. By grouping these animals together, Owen argued they formed one of the most distinctive reptile lineages ever discovered, with strong limbs and unusual hip bones that suggested an elevated, almost mammal-like posture. Yet the fossils that made this possible were not primarily Owen's. Many of the key Iguanodon bones had passed through Mantell's hands first. Mantell had painstakingly collected and described them, only to see Owen use that material to define the grand new category. Tension grew as Owen's name became attached to the broader idea of dinosaurs, while Mantell was increasingly treated as a secondary figure. Who truly owned this new kind of animal? The discoverer in the countryside, or the interpreter in London? Owen's reconstructions carried enormous authority. His influence, combined with limited fossil material, led him to imagine Iguanodon as a heavy, rhino-like plant eater, moving slowly on four pillar-like legs. The body was deep and bulky, the tail dragged, and the skin was envisioned as thick and reptilian. In this view, dinosaurs were powerful but lumbering, semi-lizard-like beasts that filled the ancient environment rather than agile, dynamic animals. For decades, artists and model makers followed this template almost without question. There was, however, a deeper problem. Both Owen and Mantell accepted key assumptions about Iguanodon's body that seemed logical at the time, yet were dramatically wrong. Even the animal's most dangerous weapon was placed in the wrong location. What if the very feature that could turn a slow rhino into a formidable defender was hiding in plain sight on the wrong part of the skeleton and waiting for new fossils to expose the mistake? For many millions of years, the real Iguanodon carried its weapon in silence. In Victorian Britain, the fossil that hinted at this weapon was small, thick, and strangely shaped. Yet it would mislead some of the most confident scientific minds of the age. The bone was isolated, conical, and powerful looking. It was not flat like a blade, not curved like a rib, and not clearly part of the skull. In the fragmentary skeletons that Gideon Mantell and later Richard Owen studied, this spike had no obvious partner. It did not lock cleanly into the known hand bones, and it did not match the familiar shapes of vertebrae or limb joints. To scientists working with only scattered fossils and broken bones, it looked like a weapon in search of a home. In the 1800s, large herbivores with strange spikes and horns were already known from the living world. Rhinos carried strong horns on their noses, and many mammals used headgear to defend themselves. Influenced by this living template, early scientists have assumed that a thick, conical spike must sit on the face. If Iguanodon was a reptilian version of a rhino, then a horn on the nose seemed not only reasonable, but almost required. As a result, the spike migrated in the imagination. Artists placed it squarely on the snout, turning Iguanodon into a heavy, lumbering beast with a single forward-pointing horn. Early reconstructions in books, museum displays, and engravings showed this dinosaur standing like a swollen iguana or reptilian rhinoceros, tail dragging, body low, and a dramatic horn rising from the nose. For decades, this was one of the most familiar images of a plant-eating dinosaur. This vision played an important role in shaping public belief. Visitors saw the horned Iguanodon and accepted it as fact, just as earlier generations had accepted drawings of strange sea monsters. The authority of the museum case and the formal tone of scientific descriptions gave the impression that the puzzle was solved. Yet the key piece was still in the wrong place. Here the pattern breaks. If such a central feature could be misplaced, what else in those early reconstructions might be wrong? Evidence showing that a spike can slide from hand to nose in scientific art raises a difficult question. How many other dinosaurs have been rebuilt around assumptions that later fossils will overturn? Confident lines on paper can hide deep uncertainty in the rock. The misread thumb spike became a warning sign. It showed that even careful comparisons with living animals can mislead when the skeleton is incomplete. It also prepared the ground for a dramatic correction. Far from the chalk cliffs of southern England, in the dark depths of a Belgian coal mine, a different kind of evidence waited. There, a catastrophic event had buried dozens of Iguanodon together, preserving articulated skeletons in life position. When those bodies were finally uncovered, the mysterious spike would be found locked firmly into the hand, revealing its true function and forcing scientists to redraw Iguanodon from the thumb outward. That revelation in a Belgian coal mine would come too late for one of the most famous versions of Iguanodon ever built. Long before those articulated skeletons were raised from the darkness, Victorian Britain had already dragged Iguanodon into the light, turned it into stone, and placed it on display as a symbol of power, progress, and control over deep time. In the 1850s, on the landscaped grounds around the relocated Crystal Palace in London, an entirely new kind of attraction appeared. Artificial islands were sculpted into rocky outcrops, ringed with ponds and lush plantings meant to evoke ancient swamps and forests. Among these carefully arranged trees and ferns, life-sized prehistoric animals rose from the ground, forming what was effectively the first dinosaur theme park. For visitors who had only read about fossils in newspapers or pamphlets, this was the ancient world made solid. At the center of this spectacle stood Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins's gigantic Iguanodon sculptures. Working under the guidance of Richard Owen, Hawkins built bodies that were heavy and rhino-like, with barrel chests, massive shoulders, and thick, sprawling limbs braced against the earth. The tail dragged behind as a solid counterweight, and the head was low and blunt, armed with strong jaws and a beak framed by rows of plant-shearing teeth. Most striking of all was the single prominent horn placed squarely on the snout, the misplaced thumb spike turned into a nasal weapon. These stone animals were not quiet garden ornaments. They quickly became cultural icons. Hawkins constructed the Iguanodon models hollow, and in a famous publicity event, a full dinner party was held inside the body of one unfinished sculpture. Guests sat at a long table where ribs should have been, toasting the birth of a new science beneath a roof of iron and brick shaped like dinosaur flesh and bones. Newspapers printed engravings of the scene, along with dramatic illustrations of the finished monsters looming over polite Victorian crowds. For many visitors, this was the first encounter with dinosaurs as living presences rather than distant, broken fossils. Yet the entire display rested on flawed assumptions. Scientists have uncovered abundant evidence showing that Iguanodon did not crawl on sprawling limbs like a scaled rhinoceros, and its famous spike never belonged on the nose. The Crystal Palace statues looked powerful and dangerous, but they froze a mistaken image in stone, one of the most influential errors in the history of paleontology. That error played an important role in shaping how the public imagined dinosaurs for generations. This raises an unsettling question. If highly respected scientists, armed with the best fossils of their time, could be so dramatically wrong, what will future researchers say about the reconstructions admired today? As new evidence emerges from rock and bone, the image of Iguanodon will shift again, and with it, the understanding of how this animal truly lived, moved, and survived among predators many millions of years ago. As the 19th century moved on, that question became harder to ignore. The Crystal Palace Iguanodons still stood in their artificial garden, heavy and motionless, but out in real quarries and cuttings across Europe, new fossils were quietly telling a different story. more partial skeletons of Iguanodon began to appear in England, France, Germany, and Belgium. Individual bones were no longer isolated curiosities. Some were found together in rough association, hinting at true body proportions. Thigh bones and shin bones suggested longer, more powerful hind limbs than the statues showed. The forelimbs, when compared carefully, did not always match the massive column-like arms of a reptilian rhinoceros. Scientists have started to notice that the famous model's body plan did not fit the growing fossil record. One of the most important clues came from the tail. In the Crystal Palace reconstruction, it sprawled along the ground like a crocodile's, acting almost as a third support. But more complete tails showed tall, interlocking bones and stiffening tendons running along their length. This was evidence showing that the tail was not a soft, dragging weight. Instead, it formed a rigid, strong structure, better suited to being held off the ground as a counterbalance. At the same time, the limb bones raised new questions. The hind legs looked robust and straight, more like the limbs of large, weight-bearing land animals that walked with their bodies held higher. Some hip joints seemed arranged to swing under the body rather than out to the side. Could this dinosaur have spent much of its time with its backbone level and its tail lifted, rather than slumped forward like a giant iguana? Some researchers even proposed that Iguanodon might have been able to stand or move on its hind legs alone. This changing anatomy hinted at a different way of life. Instead of a sluggish garden monster rooted to the ground, Iguanodon began to appear as a more mobile herbivore. Longer hind limbs, a stiff balancing tail, and flexible forelimbs suggested an animal that could browse on all fours, then rear back when threatened or when reaching higher plants. In this view, herds of Iguanodon could shift quickly from slow feeding to powerful bursts of movement, using their beaks, grinding teeth, and thumb spikes to defend themselves in a dangerous environment filled with predators. Yet the public image refused to move. Visitors still picnicked beside the stone giants, while guidebooks repeated the old story. Inside museums and scientific journals, however, doubts were spreading. Each new discovery played an important role in undermining the old posture, but without a complete, articulated skeleton, arguments remained uncertain. How far from the truth were those beloved statues? The answer would come from deep underground. In the coal mines of Dinosaur, Belgium, miners were cutting through rock laid down many millions of years ago. Their work would suddenly expose a hidden chamber packed with Iguanodon bones, a mass grave preserved in astonishing detail. When those skeletons reached the surface, the stone myth of Iguanodon would finally break. 1,000 feet below the quiet Belgian countryside, the Dinosaur coal mine was a world of darkness and pressure. Narrow shafts cut through ancient rock, timbers creaked under the weight above, and water seeped constantly from the walls, dripping in a slow, steady rhythm. For the miners, this hidden realm was supposed to hold only coal laid down many millions of years ago. Instead, their picks struck something unexpected and strangely hard. At first, it was just a different layer in the rock, a band that sounded wrong when the tools hit it. Instead of the dull response of coal, there was a sharper ring. As the miners cleared the face, pale shapes began to emerge from the black walls. Long curves, interlocking segments, not rock, bones. Within days, it became clear that this was not a single skeleton or a scattered set of fragments. The mine had opened into a buried graveyard. When the overlying rock was carefully removed, an astonishing scene appeared. Dozens of Iguanodon lay entombed together, preserved in 3 dimensions rather than crushed flat. Many skeletons were still articulated, the bones locked in life position from skull to tail. Some individuals were nearly complete, with the spine, ribs, limbs, and even the delicate bones of the hands and feet still connected. It was one of the most remarkable dinosaur discoveries ever made. Scientists have records showing that around 30 major skeletons could be reconstructed, along with many partial individuals. In some cases, the neck arched back, the tail stretched behind, and the hind limbs folded as if the animal had collapsed and never moved again. Several bodies lay oriented in similar directions, as though a group had been caught and buried at the same moment. This was not a slow accumulation of remains. It was a single catastrophic deposit. What kind of disaster could trap a herd of large plant-eating dinosaurs so completely? Early interpretations focused on the local environment. Evidence showing that the bones were concentrated in a deep depression suggested a sinkhole or bog filled with mud and water. The idea emerged that a group of Iguanodon wandered into this hidden trap, became stuck in the soft ground, and struggled until exhaustion. One by one, the animals sank deeper, their strong bodies preserved where they fell. For scientists who had argued for decades about posture, spikes, and tails, Dinosaur played an important role in ending guesswork. Here, there was no need to imagine where the limbs attached or how the backbone curved. The fossils answered directly. Forelimbs lay in front, hind limbs behind, the tail extended and off the ground, and the mysterious spike clearly formed part of the hand. In this silent chamber of rock and bone, Iguanodon's real skeleton stood assembled, ready to rewrite its image. The Dinosaur mass grave would not only transform one dinosaur, it would force a complete rethinking of how such animals lived, moved, and defended themselves. The next question was clear. What did this new, accurate Iguanodon look like in life? The answer came from the bones themselves. When the Dinosaur skeletons were mounted in lifelike poses, a very different Iguanodon stepped out of the rock. Instead of a sagging reptilian body with a tail dragging in the dust, the vertebrae and limb joints demanded a more dynamic frame, one that looked ready to move, turn, and react. Along the backbone, the tail told one of the most important parts of this story. The Dinosaur tails were long, straight, and reinforced by a lattice of ossified tendons that ran along the vertebrae. These tendons acted like biological splints, locking the tail into a mostly rigid beam. Rather than a heavy weight pulled along the ground, the tail became a powerful counterbalance, held clear of the earth and aligned with the spine, stabilizing the body as it shifted and accelerated. The limbs added further evidence showing that Iguanodon was not a sluggish rhino mimic. The hind legs were long and strong, with massive thigh bones and broad joints capable of supporting considerable weight on 2 feet. In contrast, the forelimbs were shorter but still robust, ending in complex hands. The pelvis flared out with a structure similar to other ornithopod dinosaurs, indicating hips designed for an upright, weight-bearing stance. Together, these proportions pointed to a primarily bipedal animal that could also drop forward onto all fours when needed. Mounted this way, the new skeleton had a horizontal backbone, the tail extended behind, and the head projecting forward at the end of a balanced neck. This posture contrasted sharply with the Crystal Palace figures, which stood like reptilian rhinoceroses, barrel-chested and low, with tails slumped on the ground. In the museum hall, the Dinosaur Iguanodon suddenly appeared more agile, more alert, and less like a plodding monster from a static age. This shift in posture also transformed ideas about behavior. A body balanced over powerful hind limbs and a stiffened tail suggested faster movement and the ability to pivot quickly if threatened. Instead of imagining it as a slow grazer, scientists began to picture Iguanodon striding across floodplains, turning sharply to face danger or to flee from large predators. A higher head position and flexible neck hinted at more dynamic feeding, with the animal rearing onto 2 legs to reach taller vegetation, or dropping to all fours to browse lower plants, depending on the environment and situation. Attention then focused on the hands, where the Dinosaur fossils revealed an even stranger design. Several fingers were fused into hoof-like supports, helping on all fours, while the 5th finger remained flexible, able to grasp or pull branches. Most striking of all, the famous spike sat on the thumb, not the nose. This sharp, conical weapon, combined with a strong beak and grinding teeth, suggested that Iguanodon's true arsenal was only beginning to be understood, and that its defenses might be far more complex than a simple horn. What exactly could those hands do in life? In the dark galleries of the Dinosaur mine, the answer to that question was locked in stone. The nearly complete Iguanodon skeletons lay with hands outstretched, fingers splayed, and there again and again the same detail appeared. The mysterious spike was not on the nose at all. It was firmly articulated on the hand, taking the place of an enlarged first finger. The horn of Victorian imagination was, in reality, a weaponized thumb. For the first time, scientists had clear, repeated evidence showing that the spike was part of the hand skeleton itself. Its base sat among the wrist and palm bones, aligned with the other digits rather than with the skull. This was not a loose piece that might have drifted in the sediments. The joint surfaces matched, the orientation was consistent, and the pattern was identical across many individuals. The Dinosaur fossils did not whisper a suggestion. They delivered a verdict. The anatomy of that thumb spike was just as striking as its true position. At the base, it was thick and rounded, forming a strong socket where powerful ligaments and muscles could attach. From this broad foundation, the spike narrowed into a sharply pointed cone, with a tip fine enough to pierce flesh. The internal structure of the bone shows dense tissue near the surface, suggesting it could resist bending and absorb impact. This was not a fragile ornament. It was built to take force and to give it back. Such a structure changes how Iguanodon's hand is understood. The other fingers ended in hooves for supporting weight or grasping branches, but the thumb was a dagger. With a simple twist of the forearm, the animal could bring that spike to bear, turning a seemingly harmless plant-eating limb into a short-range stabbing tool. In close quarters, where jaws and teeth might be locked together, this hidden weapon could decide which dinosaur pulled away alive. What could that spike do in a fight? Scientists have proposed several functions, each grounded in the way the bones and joints fit together. A lunging theropod, biting at the neck or flank, might meet a sudden upward thrust of the thumb, driving the spike into soft tissue between ribs or under the jaw. A predator grappling from the side could be raked and jabbed as the forelimb swept backward. Even within the herd, males might have used these spikes in dominance displays or controlled combat, clashing shoulders and forelimbs rather than risking vital organs. Here, the pattern of the ancient ecosystem shifts. This was a herbivore, but it carried a built-in bayonet that predators had to respect. Instead of a simple story of gentle plant eaters and ruthless hunters, the environment many millions of years ago begins to look more balanced, more dangerous on all sides. Iguanodon was prey, but it was armed prey, and that raised an important question for any carnivore that shared its world. How much would an attack really cost? That question becomes even sharper when the rest of Iguanodon's defenses are considered, from its beak and grinding teeth to the safety of the herd. That question becomes even sharper when the rest of Iguanodon's defenses are considered, from its beak and grinding teeth to the safety of the herd. Inside the skull, this plant eater carried another kind of weapon, a feeding system built less like a simple set of jaws and more like industrial machinery. The skull of Iguanodon was long and slightly wedge-shaped, with a narrow snout that ended in a hard, keratinous beak. At the very front, there were no teeth at all, just this sharp cutting edge, perfect for cropping ferns, cycads, and low branches in its ancient environment. Behind that, the skull deepened and widened, creating space for rows of teeth and strong jaw muscles, turning the rear of the head into a compact processing unit for plant material. Along the cheeks, Iguanodon carried one of the most impressive dental systems seen in early large herbivorous dinosaurs. Instead of a single row of simple teeth, each position held vertical stacks of replacement teeth. As older teeth wore down, new ones pushed up from below, locking together into a broad grinding surface. Scientists have compared this arrangement to a dental battery because it acted like a continuous block rather than separate biting points. This battery allowed Iguanodon to do more than just snip leaves. The tightly packed teeth formed rough, uneven surfaces that could shred, crush, and pulverize tough vegetation. Microscopic scratches on fossil teeth provide evidence showing that the jaws moved not only up and down, but with a slight sideways motion, creating a powerful grinding stroke. In a world filled with fibrous plants and armored leaves, such efficiency played an important role in extracting enough energy to fuel a heavy active body. To drive this system, the skull offered broad areas for muscle attachment. The rear of the skull was deep, with expanded bones that anchored strong jaw muscles pulling upward and forward. When those muscles contracted, the lower jaw was clamped shut with considerable force, then guided through that subtle sideways slide. It was not the quick snapping bite of a predator, but a slow crushing press designed to break down plant tissues again and again. Bite force estimates based on skull shape and muscle reconstruction suggest that Iguanodon could deliver a surprisingly strong bite. In pure crushing power at the back of the jaws, some analyses indicate it may have rivaled or even exceeded certain meat-eating dinosaurs that lived many millions of years ago. Against bone, it would not match a Tyrannosaurus, but against tough stems and branches, its jaws were extremely effective. This makes Iguanodon dangerous in a different sense. Its skull was a heavy-duty processing machine, built to dominate its plant food sources and survive intense competition with other herbivores. Any predator facing a herd of such animals had to reckon not just with thumb spikes and hooves, but with heads built like living grinders. And as scientists turn from the jaws to the rest of the skeleton, another question emerges. How did this powerful plant processor move through its world? That powerful plant processing head was only the front of a much larger machine. For millions of years, Iguanodon's entire body functioned as a moving fortress, built not for speed or stealth, but for presence, mass, and collective defense. Adult Iguanodon were large animals by any standard. Most estimates place typical adults at around 9 to 10 meters in length, roughly 30 to 33 feet from snout to tail tip, and weighing several tons. In terms of sheer mass, they were comparable to modern rhinos or even small elephants. In an early Cretaceous environment filled with predators, that size alone made each individual one of the most challenging targets a hunter could choose. The torso of Iguanodon was deep and heavily built. Fossils show tall neural spines on the back vertebrae and broad ribs that created a wide, barrel-shaped chest. This space housed a large gut, needed to ferment and break down tough plant material. The pelvic region was especially strong, with massive hip bones and reinforced joints that could carry the weight of this huge digestive engine. The result was a body that looked and functioned like a tank, with a low center of gravity and a solid core that predators would struggle to topple. Although Iguanodon did not have bony plates like an ankylosaur, there is evidence showing that its skin was thick and likely supported toughened areas over key regions. Skin impressions from related ornithopod dinosaurs reveal a mosaic of scales, some larger and more robust than others. Scientists have suggested that even without true armor, this hide would have resisted slashing bites and shallow claw wounds, forcing attackers to work harder and longer to inflict fatal damage. Posture added another layer to this defense. On all fours, Iguanodon carried its body horizontally, but its strong hind limbs and balanced tail allowed it to rise into a bipedal stance. In that moment, the skull and neck could swing upward, lifting the head several meters into the air. A standing adult could suddenly appear far taller, expanding its profile and making its thumb spikes, forelimbs, and chest seem even more imposing. Faced with such a display, would a predator think twice before charging? This effect multiplied dramatically in groups. Fossil bone beds, such as the famous Bernoussaur assemblage in Belgium, preserve many individuals together and provide evidence showing that Iguanodon often lived in herds. A line of several multi-ton animals, half-reared on their hind legs, could form a living wall of flesh, muscle, and bone. The front ranks could brace on all fours, while those behind rose higher, turning the entire herd into a layered barrier of heads, hooves, and spikes. In such a formation, the body of each dinosaur played an important role in shielding the others. How did predators even begin to approach such a defended mass? And what happened when this fortress decided not just to stand its ground, but to move? When that living fortress advanced, each Iguanodon carried something even more surprising than a heavy body and a strong tail. Its front limbs were not simple pillars for walking. They were complex, multi-purpose tools, built at once for movement, feeding, and close-quarters defense. The hand of Iguanodon was one of the most unusual structures in any large herbivorous dinosaur. Scientists have reconstructed it from beautifully preserved fossils, showing 3 central fingers that were stiffened and hoof-like. The joints between their bones were limited, the tips broad and flattened, forming a kind of weight-bearing tripod when the animal dropped onto all fours. These fingers acted almost like the front hooves of a giant mammal, able to take the load of a heavy chest and neck as the dinosaur moved slowly through its environment. On the outside of this trio sat a very different digit. The 5th finger was long, slender, and flexible, with joints that allowed it to curl and grasp. Evidence showing that these bones were more mobile suggests that it could hook around branches, pull leaves closer, or steady food, while the beak and teeth sheared it away. Many millions of years ago, this gave Iguanodon something rare among large plant eaters of its size: a partial hand capable of manipulation as well as support. The inner side of the hand held the most famous feature of all. Where a normal thumb might be expected, Iguanodon carried a short, conical spike, sharply pointed and strongly rooted in the hand bones. Early scientists once placed this spike on the nose, but articulated skeletons proved that it was a specialized digit. In life, it projected outward like a compact spear, ready to be driven into anything that came too close. This combination of hoof-like fingers, grasping 5th digit, and thumb spike allowed Iguanodon to shift smoothly between rolls. With head down and hands braced, it could walk on all fours while feeding, the forelimbs helping to support the long neck as it swept through low vegetation. Alarmed, it could rear back, freeing the front limbs, or even run bipedally, turning those same hands from supports into balancing arms and potential weapons. The same limbs that steadied the body could suddenly become part of an active defense. In close combat, the integration became even clearer. Forelimbs that had just been pulling branches could plant firmly, twist the shoulders, and drive the thumb spike toward a predator's flank or face. The arms helped control the position of the attacker, while the rest of the body pushed forward. This was not a passive victim. It was a herbivore built to answer force with force. Modern large herbivores show a similar coordination. A bison lowers its head and horns while bracing with strong forelegs. A rhinoceros drives its horn with the full weight of its shoulders. Iguanodon did something comparable, but with hands and spike instead of horns alone. Its limbs and weapon worked together. This is where the simple image of a harmless plant eater breaks down. Those front limbs were not just for walking. They were multi-purpose, weaponized structures that blurred the line between prey and combatant, setting the stage for an animal far harder to kill than early reconstructions ever suggested. Those weaponized hands meant that Iguanodon was dangerous up close, but its real survival test began long before a predator reached striking distance. In a world filled with powerful carnivorous dinosaurs, speed could be as important as spikes. For millions of years, plant eaters that could move first and fastest often lived long enough to pass on their genes. The hind limbs of Iguanodon were one of the most revealing parts of its skeleton. The thigh bone was long and strong, with broad areas for muscle attachment, and the shin and ankle formed a sturdy interlocking joint. This arrangement suggests an animal built for sustained, active movement rather than slow, dragging steps. Scientists have pointed to the long lower leg and the relatively narrow bird-like foot as evidence showing that Iguanodon could take powerful strides across its floodplain environment. When biomechanists study Iguanodon, they often compare it to large flightless birds and medium-sized ungulates. Ostriches and emus, for example, combine long legs, rigid backs, and balanced bodies to reach impressive speeds. Iguanodon was heavier, but the same basic principles apply. Using limb proportions, estimated muscle mass, and trackway spacing, scientists have produced rough speed estimates ranging from about 15 to perhaps 23 kilometers per hour for normal movement, with the possibility of short bursts that were faster when truly threatened. The structure of its hips and tail adds another layer to this picture. The stiffened tail and strong pelvic bones created a counterbalance for the front of the body. This design meant that Iguanodon could shift its weight backward, lifting the forelimbs and moving from a four-legged walk to a two-legged run. On all fours, it gained stability for slow feeding and careful movement, but on two legs, it traded that stability for speed. In a dangerous moment, that change could happen quickly. Trackways and limb modeling suggest that smaller and younger individuals may have spent even more time on two legs. This would have made them more agile, able to zigzag or accelerate away from sudden attacks. Adults, heavier and longer, likely moved in a mixed posture, walking on all fours while grazing, then surging upright into a rapid, pounding sprint when a predator closed in. How many lives were saved by those extra seconds of acceleration? In herd animals, speed is a survival metric as real as teeth or armor. Too slow and a group of plant eaters becomes a moving buffet for any strong hunter that breaks their ranks. Fast enough, and only the weakest, slowest, or most isolated individuals can be caught. In that sense, the long legs of Iguanodon played an important role in turning a herd from easy prey into a shifting, dangerous target. Yet speed was only one part of its defense. When a predator finally caught up, how did this combination of size, mobility, and thumb spikes shape a real confrontation with the apex hunters that shared its world? To understand that confrontation, the story has to shift from skeletons to footprints. Many millions of years ago, along broad coastal plains and riverbanks in what is now Europe, soft mud recorded the passing of Iguanodon-like herds. Those temporary impressions later hardened into stone, preserving long parallel lines of three-toed tracks that still cross ancient rock surfaces today. These trackways are one of the most direct windows into how these dinosaurs actually moved. Each footprint is three-toed, broad, and slightly longer than it is wide, matching the hind feet suggested by Iguanodon fossils. In some sites, such as those in England, Spain, and Belgium, dozens of trackways run side by side, all trending in nearly the same direction. This is not a random scattering of prints. It is the frozen record of a coordinated movement across the landscape. Scientists have used the spacing between footprints, their depth, and their arrangement to estimate gait and speed. When the distance between consecutive prints is short and the impressions are deep and evenly spaced, the animal was walking with a steady, weight-bearing stride. When the steps stretch farther apart and the toes dig in more strongly at the front, it suggests a faster pace, perhaps a trot or a brief run. By combining these measurements with hip height taken from skeletons, researchers can calculate approximate speeds, turning bare rock into a record of living motion. The orientation of the trackways also carries important information. Where many lines of prints run almost perfectly parallel, with similar stride lengths and similar depths, there is strong evidence showing that multiple iguanodon-sized animals were moving together at roughly the same speed. This pattern appears again and again on ancient mudflats, indicating that traveling in groups played an important role in their daily lives. These were not solitary wanderers crossing the plain by chance. They were parts of organized herds. In some rare sites, smaller three-toed tracks occur beside larger ones, heading in the same direction. The size difference suggests juveniles moving alongside adults, keeping pace within the same general band of travel. Such mixed-age trackways hint at more complex social behavior, perhaps loose family groups where younger animals stayed within the protective zone created by larger, stronger bodies. In a world filled with danger, that kind of structure could mean survival. Yet even here, the ground tells a tense story. These herds moved along shorelines, across floodplains, and through low coastal forests, environments that also supported large predators. If Iguanodon herds marched together over these dangerous surfaces, what powerful hunters were shadowing their paths just out of sight? And in the same rocks that preserve their orderly tracks, is there any evidence showing that those journeys sometimes ended in violent confrontation? For many millions of years, the world of Iguanodon was both rich with plant life and filled with danger. Herds of these large plant eaters moved through landscapes that could feed them well, but also hid powerful hunters that turned every open crossing into a risk. Iguanodon lived during the early Cretaceous period, around 126 to 125 million years ago. At that time, the land that is now Western Europe was broken into a patchwork of islands, floodplains, and low coastal flats. Wide rivers wound between raised forested ridges, while broad muddy plains spread out toward shallow seas. This island world created natural corridors and traps, shaping where large dinosaurs could travel and where predators could wait. The climate in this region was warm and generally humid, with no long freezing winters. Forests of tall conifers, ginkgos, and tree ferns rose above dense undergrowth, while horsetails and cycads crowded the river margins. Scientists have found fossil pollen and plant impressions that show flowering plants were beginning to appear, still rare but slowly spreading. For a large browser like Iguanodon, this meant a layered buffet of leaves, shoots, and low branches, but also dense cover that could hide stalking carnivores. Floodplains and wetlands played an important role in this environment. Broad channels shifted over time, leaving oxbow lakes, muddy backwaters, and deep pools. These areas concentrated vegetation and drew herds in to drink and feed, yet the same soft ground could suddenly give way beneath a heavy animal. There is evidence showing that some Iguanodon and their neighbors became trapped in mud or collapsed banks, their bones later preserved in stacked layers of river sediment. Around them lived a varied community of other dinosaurs. Smaller ornithopods, some no larger than a dog, darted between the legs of the forest, feeding on softer plants and seeds. Armored ankylosaurs, low and heavily built, carried bony plates and tail clubs that turned their backs into living shields. In some regions, early horned dinosaurs, primitive ceratopsians without the huge frills of later forms, browsed alongside them. Overhead, pterosaurs with long wings and light bones glided along coastlines and river valleys, while in the water, crocodile relatives waited near the banks for anything that strayed too close. Beneath the ferns and fallen logs, small mammals hunted insects and seeds, living mostly in the shadows of the giants. Their teeth and jawbones appear in the same rock layers as Iguanodon, giving scientists direct evidence of a complex, multi-level ecosystem. Yet the greatest threat came from large theropod predators. To these meat-eating dinosaurs, an adult Iguanodon was not a scientific icon, but a walking mass of muscle. Some had long blade-like teeth for slicing flesh. Others combined strong jaws with grasping arms and hooked claws. Tracks and scattered fossils suggest that these hunters shadowed the same routes along rivers and coastal flats, turning Iguanodon herds into central targets in the food web. In this setting, Iguanodon stood near the top of the herbivore hierarchy. Its size, numbers, and powerful beak for cropping tough plants meant that it shaped the vegetation wherever it fed. But being one of the most important plant eaters also meant constant pressure from above. How did it face these dangers, and what defenses did it carry beyond sheer bulk? those dangers were never far away. For millions of years, the peaceful feeding grounds of Iguanodon were also hunting territories patrolled by giant carnivorous dinosaurs with powerful jaws and blade-like teeth. In the early Cretaceous landscapes of Europe, the main threats came from large theropods related to allosaurids and Carcharodontosaurids. In what is now England, animals such as Neovenator stalked coastal plains and river valleys, reaching lengths of around 7 to 10 meters. Farther south and east, in regions that would become France, Spain, and Belgium, similar large predators occupied the same environments as iguanodon herds, filling the role of apex hunters that tested every defense the herbivores possessed. These predators were built for attack. Their skulls were long and deep, with rows of serrated teeth designed to slice rather than crush. A single bite could open wide wounds and cause massive blood loss in even a strong, multi-ton herbivore. Their arms, although shorter than those of Iguanodon, often carried curved claws that could grip, slash, and hold struggling prey. Combined with muscular legs and a balancing tail, they could launch sudden charges, using momentum and repeated bites to wear down their targets. Scientists have compared their hunting strategies to those of large pack-hunting mammals, although direct proof of group behavior is limited. Some evidence showing that multiple individuals may have moved through the same trackways suggests that at least temporary associations were possible. Whether hunting alone or together, these theropods likely relied on surprise, speed, and deep wounds, rather than a single killing bite, circling and striking until a victim weakened. Like many large predators, they probably focused on the most vulnerable members of iguanodon groups. Juveniles that strayed from the center of the herd, older adults with worn joints, or injured animals that could not run as fast would have been prime targets. But healthy adults were not completely safe. An isolated iguanodon, separated from its herd by a river crossing or a sudden panic, would have faced a terrifying disadvantage against an organized assault from a determined carnivore. Fossils provide direct clues for this dangerous relationship. In some early Cretaceous sites, isolated iguanodon bones have been found with gouges and scratches that match the shape and spacing of large theropod teeth. Other localities preserve shed carnivorous teeth mixed among iguanodon remains, dropped during feeding or attack. Scientists have used this evidence to argue that these predators did not just scavenge carcasses, they actively hunted the plant eaters that played an important role in shaping the environment many millions of years ago. In such a world, where a sudden roar and a flash of teeth could turn a quiet feeding ground into a killing field, simple size was not enough. When the hunters emerged from the tree line and charged, how did iguanodon herds react, and what happened in those first critical seconds of an attack? In those first moments, survival did not depend on a single strong animal, but on the reaction of the entire herd. For millions of years, large plant-eating dinosaurs like Iguanodon relied on numbers, awareness, and coordination to stand their ground against powerful hunters. In open floodplains and forest clearings, the herd itself became the first line of defense. Herding offered several major advantages. Many eyes scanned the surrounding environment, so a distant shape or sudden movement could be detected seconds earlier than by a lone animal. That extra time mattered. It allowed adults to bunch together, call out, and pull vulnerable juveniles toward the safest position. Scientists have found trackways of ornithopod dinosaurs that show groups of different sizes moving together, evidence showing that mixed-age herds were common many millions of years ago. As danger closed in, the shape of the herd likely changed. Instead of a loose scattering of bodies, iguanodon adults may have swung into a defensive formation, forming a ring or a tight arc that faced the threat. Large, muscular shoulders and chests turned outward, while tails and flanks curved inward, creating a living wall. In the center of that wall, smaller juveniles could press together, shielded from direct attack by a barrier of strong bodies and heavy bones. This was not just a passive circle. Each adult carried a pair of short, sharp thumb spikes on the hands. and in a defensive stance, those spikes would have been angled toward the attacker. A predator charging this formation would not meet a single fleeing target, but a line of heads, forelimbs, and slashing thumb spikes. One step too close could mean a deep stab to the neck, chest, or soft tissue between the ribs. Modern animals provide a powerful analog. Musk oxen in the Arctic form, tight circles with their horns pointing outward when wolves approach, while the calves stand safely inside. African buffalo bunch into dense formations, lowering their heads and presenting a solid front to lions. These behaviors show that large herbivores can use group structure as a weapon, and scientists have used such patterns to argue that similar tactics likely played an important role in dinosaur herds. Here, the usual image of helpless plant eaters starts to break. Instead of panic and scattering, picture a coordinated stand. A charging predator would face not one target, but a wall of heavy bodies, stabbing thumb spikes and pounding feet capable of trampling an attacker that misjudged its angle. Even a strong carnivore would have to circle, probe, and wait for a mistake. This is the pattern interrupt. The herbivore herd was not merely prey. It was an active, organized defensive unit that could turn size and cooperation into a collective weapon. The real question becomes, how did individual iguanodon bodies support this strategy, and what special adaptations made each animal a reliable piece of that living shield? The answer lies in the scars. For millions of years, iguanodon bodies recorded every impact, every bite, and every desperate escape in their bones. These silent marks turn the skeleton from a simple frame into a battlefield map of the ancient environment. In several iguanodon and closely related ornithopod fossils, scientists have identified broken ribs, twisted tailbones, and damaged hip elements that later healed. Some ribs are bent and refused. Others show thick callus where the fracture was once open and unstable. This is evidence showing that these dinosaurs survived powerful blows, either from predators slamming into them, from falls on uneven ground, or from the crushing weight of their own herd during panicked movement. Other bones tell a more direct story of violence. On limb bones and tail vertebrae, paleontologists have found deep grooves and punctures that match the size and spacing of theropod teeth. The edges of these marks are sometimes smooth and rounded, showing healing, and sometimes sharp and unfinished, suggesting the animal died soon after. In both cases, the pattern of damage shows that Iguanodon lived under constant threat from strong meat-eating dinosaurs. To identify the attackers, scientists compare the shape, spacing, and cross-section of each bite mark with known predator teeth from the same rock layers. Broad, U-shaped bites with widely spaced punctures can point toward large allosaur-grade theropods, while narrower, blade-like scrapes may indicate more lightly built hunters. When a jaw from a predator and a bitten iguanodon bone come from the same quarry and same age, the match between tooth row and wound spacing can be remarkably close. In this way, researchers can reconstruct who bit whom, even many millions of years after the struggle. Some of the most striking injuries are those that clearly healed. There are iguanodon relatives with crushed tail tips that later fused, and limb bones with infected swollen callus where a serious fracture slowly knit back together. One specimen shows a series of parallel tooth marks on the hip, overgrown by new bone. This means the animal not only escaped the attack, but lived long enough for its body to remodel the wound. Such fossils are one of the most direct signs that herd defense, strong muscles, those famous thumb spikes, sometimes worked. Not every injury came from a predator. In crowded herds moving through wet floodplains, trampling could easily shatter small bones in the feet or lower tail. A misstep on a collapsed riverbank might send a heavy adult crashing onto a juvenile. Combat between individuals, using body mass to shove and thumb spikes to jab, could also explain some localized damage to shoulders and flanks. These patterns show that social life itself played an important role in shaping Iguanodon skeletons. In the end, these scars in the bone are the closest thing to eyewitness accounts of Iguanodon's daily battles. But what kind of catastrophe could overwhelm entire herds at once, leaving dozens of skeletons entombed together in the depths of the Dinosaur mine? To answer that question, the story has to sink down into the ground itself. Many millions of years ago, where the Dinosaur coal mine would one day open, the landscape was not a dark tunnel, but a low, waterlogged hollow in a broad river plain. The sedimentary layers there tell of deep, peaty depressions filled with mud, plant debris, and standing water, forming a natural trap hidden beneath a thin, deceptive surface. Geologists studying the site have found evidence showing that this hollow behaved like a sinkhole or swampy depression. Thick, uneven seams of clay and coal-rich mud sag downward, as if the ground had collapsed into a deeper cavity. The deposits are rich in plant fossils and fine-grained sediments, exactly what would be expected from a stagnant pool or marsh that stayed wet for a long time. In this kind of environment, the surface could look firm, but just beneath lay soft, unstable ground. Into this ancient landscape, a herd of Iguanodon moved. Imagine dozens of heavy herbivores, each powered by strong hind limbs and massive muscles, crossing what seemed like a safe, low-lying route between patches of forest. Scientists have suggested that the herd may have been following water or fresh vegetation, unaware that the ground ahead was weakening. Perhaps recent flooding had raised the water table, turning the depression into something like quicksand. In one leading hypothesis, the first individuals to step onto the unstable surface began to sink. Their weight pressed through the thin crust into the deep, saturated mud below. Struggling only made it worse. As they thrashed, their limbs drove deeper, the powerful movements that once carried them across the floodplain suddenly working against them. Behind them, other herd members followed, driven by instinct to stay together. One by one, they were trapped. The positions of the skeletons at Dinosaur fit this sudden disaster. Many Iguanodon lie on their sides, limbs splayed outward, necks twisted, as if frozen mid-struggle. The bones are largely articulated, with joints still connected, which scientists have taken as evidence showing that the carcasses were buried quickly, before scavengers or flowing water could scatter them. This is not the pattern of slow, scattered deaths across a wide area. It looks like a single, overwhelming event. Such a tragedy for the dinosaurs created one of the most remarkable fossil archives for paleontologists. The deep anoxic mud shut out oxygen and slowed decay, turning the depression into a preservation trap. Entire bodies settled into the gloom, layer upon layer, sealing in details of herd composition, growth stages, and anatomy that later played an important role in redefining Iguanodon as a dynamic, social animal. If one hidden sinkhole could swallow a herd and keep their bones for 125 million years, what other moments of Iguanodon's life and death still lie locked in the rock, waiting to rewrite the story yet again? From that silent mass grave, the next chapter of Iguanodon's story unfolded not in rock, but in tunnels, cranes, and museum halls. To reach the Dinosaur skeletons, workers sank shafts and drove galleries through the coal, turning a mine into an underground laboratory. For millions of years, the bones had rested in darkness. Bringing them out would be a powerful, dangerous operation in its own right. Instead of prying individual bones from the clay, Belgian scientists chose a slower, safer method. Crews carefully tunneled around each skeleton, isolating it in a pillar of sediment. The exposed surfaces were brushed clean, wrapped in wet paper and cloth, then sealed in thick plaster jackets that hardened like armor. Only then were the blocks undercut, cradled in wooden frames, and hoisted upwards through the mine shafts, some weighing more than a small car. Every lift risked disaster. A dropped block, meant a shattered dinosaur. On the surface, the real reconstruction began. Preparators chipped away the rock grain by grain, revealing ribs, vertebrae, and the distinctive thumb spikes. Each bone was cleaned, labeled, and compared with others from the same horizon. Scientists have detailed how this careful cataloging allowed them to sort juveniles from adults and left sides from right, turning a chaotic tangle into articulated skeletons. Yet even with such strong evidence, one question remained. How should these dinosaurs stand? At the end of the 19th century, no one had ever seen a complete, nearly life-sized dinosaur mount. The Belgian team had to decide posture, limb position, and tail angle based on anatomy, trackways, and comparisons to living animals. The hind limbs were long and powerful, the pelvis broad, the forelimbs shorter, but still strong. Evidence showing that the tail vertebrae locked together suggested a stiff balancing rod rather than a dragging weight, but tradition and caution pulled in the opposite direction. The result was one of the most influential compromises in dinosaur history. In Brussels, Iguanodon rose from the floor in a semi-upright pose, hips high, chest thrust forward, hind legs braced like a giant kangaroo. The tail still touched the ground, but it no longer sprawled flat. It angled behind the body, hinting at speed and balance. Compared with the Crystal Palace statues, these mounts looked alert, ready to move. Their hands turned inward, their thumb spikes poised as weapons. When the gallery finally opened, the impact was immediate. Visitors walked between ranks of towering skeletons, surrounded by an apparent herd frozen in mid-stance. These were not sluggish reptiles half sunk in mud. They were active, muscular animals that had once dominated their environment many millions of years ago. Scientists and the public alike saw for the first time dinosaurs as dynamic actors in ancient ecosystems, rather than lumbering curiosities. Then comes the pattern interrupt. Those iron-supported skeletons, so solid and permanent, were still hypotheses in metal and bone. Each joint angle, each tail curve, each semi-upright back was a best guess, anchored in evidence but shaped by the ideas of the time. Later generations would raise the tail, drop the torso forward, and even rethink how the hands faced. The Dinosaur mounts played an important role, but they were not the final word on Iguanodon, only one more frame in a story that keeps moving. The Dinosaur mounts had frozen Iguanodon in a permanent crouch, but science was not finished with its skeleton. As more fossils and better methods appeared, a new question emerged. Could a multi-ton animal really lean on its own tail like a third leg without tearing itself apart? Advances in biomechanics offered a powerful new way to test those old poses. Scientists have built digital models of Iguanodon's hips, knees, and tail base, then asked those models to bear the stresses of the classic tripod stance. The results were clear. A tail planted on the ground would drive unnatural forces through the joints, twisting the vertebrae and overloading muscles and tendons. Instead of a stable prop, it behaved like a lever trying to bend the spine. There was also direct evidence showing that the tail was not meant to sag and scrape. Along much of Iguanodon's backbone, especially over the hips and down the tail, fossils preserve long, ossified tendons, slender rods of bone that formed inside tough connective tissue. In life, these tendons would have locked the tail into a stiff, springy beam. Such a structure is one of the most telling clues that the tail was designed to stay elevated, acting as a counterweight rather than a crutch. When this anatomy is combined with limb proportions and center of mass studies, a very different posture appears. Modern reconstructions place Iguanodon's body almost horizontal, with the hips high, the tail stretched straight behind and fully off the ground, and the head thrust forward over strong pillar-like hind limbs. The result is an animal that looks balanced and ready to move, not propped up and resting. In this form, Iguanodon becomes a dynamic herbivore capable of quick turns, steady walking, and bursts of speed when danger approached. This shift in stance also transforms its role in the ancient environment. Instead of a semi-upright kangaroo-lizard hybrid, Iguanodon begins to resemble a giant, ground-dwelling bird, driven by powerful legs and guided by a long, stabilizing tail. Its hands, freed from supporting weight, could flex inward, bringing the thumb spike and beak together as part of a complex feeding and defensive system. Herds of horizontally posed animals are easier to imagine flowing across floodplains, heads low to crop vegetation, backs and tails forming sweeping lines above the ferns. If the posture of one of the first-named dinosaurs can be rewritten so completely, what else might still be changing? The same techniques that lifted Iguanodon's tail and dropped its spine are now being applied to its growth, its nesting behavior, and even its seasonal movements. Could this animal have migrated long distances, guarded its young, or formed age-structured herds that played an important role in shaping entire ecosystems many millions of years ago? The answers are still forming, and each new fossil has the power to move Iguanodon yet again. Those questions lead directly into one of the most mysterious parts of Iguanodon's story: how it began life. For millions of years, entire generations hatched, grew, and died, yet direct traces of their earliest days are almost invisible in the rock. No complete, unquestioned Iguanodon nest has been found, and no eggs can be tied to it with absolute certainty. Instead, scientists have turned to its closest ornithopod relatives for clues. In dinosaurs like Maiasaura and Hypacrosaurus, there is clear evidence showing that these plant eaters nested in large colonies, laid clutches of eggs in shallow pits, and sometimes returned to the same nesting grounds year after year. Some sites preserve crushed eggs, tiny bones, and multiple growth stages in one place, suggesting that adults guarded nests and may have brought food to their young. If those behaviors evolved early in ornithopods, Iguanodon may have shared at least part of this life history. Inside the bones of Iguanodon, thin slices viewed under a microscope reveal how it grew. Bone histology studies show rings and textures that record growth rates, almost like tree rings, frozen in mineral form. These fossils indicate that juveniles did not stay small for long. They added bone rapidly, with dense networks of blood vessels, suggesting that young Iguanodon grew quickly through the most dangerous size classes where predators could easily overpower them. Fast growth alone, however, was not the only defense. Imagine a mixed herd spread across a Cretaceous floodplain. At the center, small, agile juveniles with shorter limbs and lighter bodies, able to dart between larger legs. Around them, subadults forming a restless middle ring, and on the outside, the massive adults, heavy tails and strong forelimbs ready to pivot and face danger. In such a formation, any attacking predator would first meet a wall of muscle, bone, and flashing thumb spikes. Modern herd animals offer powerful analogies. Elephants, bison, and musk oxen all form protective circles, with experienced adults shielding calves when large carnivores approach. Some will charge, trample, or stand their ground with deadly force. In a similar way, Iguanodon's threat may have come less from hunting and more from defending its own. A predator that misjudged a herd and pushed too close might meet a coordinated response from dozens of adults, each weighing several tons and armed with strong limbs, heavy tails, and that famous spike. Such behavior would have played an important role in ancient ecosystems, shaping where predators hunted and how other plant-eating dinosaurs shared the landscape. Yet even a socially complex herbivore, defended by numbers and rapid growth, could not control everything. In a world of shifting continents, changing climates, and evolving hunters with sharper teeth and new strategies, could Iguanodon's defenses hold out forever? Or was a larger evolutionary storm already on the horizon? For many millions of years, Iguanodon was not alone. It belonged to a wider clan of plant-eating dinosaurs called Iguanodontia, a powerful group of medium to large ornithopods that spread across ancient continents. These were not fragile animals. They carried strong hind limbs, deep chests, and jaws increasingly specialized for breaking down tough plants in changing environments. Within this group, Iguanodon sat near the center of an evolutionary story that was still unfolding. Earlier ornithopods were smaller, lightly built, and had simpler teeth arranged in loose rows. Iguanodon's skull, with its beak at the front and tightly packed grinding teeth behind, already showed a major step toward more advanced feeding strategies. Scientists have found fossils with worn tooth surfaces and replacement teeth stacked in the jaws, evidence showing that this dinosaur could process food far more efficiently than many older relatives. But Iguanodon was not the final product. Later branches of Iguanodontia would push the same basic design to extremes. From this lineage came the hadrosaurs, the famous duck-billed dinosaurs of the late Cretaceous. In these descendants, the tooth rows expanded into huge dental batteries containing hundreds of teeth, layered and locked together into one of the most effective plant-shredding systems in dinosaur history. Their jaws could move in complex sideways and forward motions, turning each bite into a grinding stroke. Compared to these later hadrosaurs, Iguanodon appears as a powerful but transitional form. Its bite was already strong, and its teeth formed an organized battery, but the system was not yet as dense or as specialized as in a hadrosaur like Edmontosaurus or Parasaurolophus. It could walk on 2 or 4 legs, defend itself with a thumb spike, and graze on a wide range of plants, yet its entire body still balanced older features with newer experiments. Then, the pattern breaks. The Iguanodon that helped create the very idea of dinosaurs in the 1800s seems in museum halls like a central character in Earth's story. In evolutionary terms, it was just one branch on a constantly changing tree. As climates shifted, as flowering plants spread, and as plant communities reorganized, the pressure on herbivores increased. Which animals could extract the most energy from every mouthful? Which could keep up as forests and floodplains transformed around them? Scientists have gathered evidence showing that more specialized feeders gradually outcompeted many iguanodon-like forms. Hadrosaurs with enormous dental batteries, flexible jaws, and rapid tooth replacement may have handled abrasive, fast-growing vegetation better, turning them into some of the most successful plant eaters of the late Cretaceous. Iguanodon's lineage did not vanish. It evolved, split, and adapted. In this light, the classic Iguanodon becomes something different. It is no longer the fixed symbol built into stone in Victorian parks, but a snapshot taken mid-transformation. The next step is to see how this animal, once treated as a model for all dinosaurs, was reinterpreted again and again as new fossils and new relatives emerged from the rock. To move beyond statues and sketches, modern paleontology turns Iguanodon into numbers. In digital form, this once symbolic dinosaur becomes a testable machine of flesh, bone, and muscle rather than a frozen Victorian guess. The process begins with the skeleton. High-resolution scanners record every curve and crack of the original fossils, building a precise, 3-dimensional model of each bone. These digital bones are then articulated in virtual space, forming a complete skeleton that can be posed, rotated, and measured. By wrapping this framework in virtual flesh, scientists create a digital body, adjusting the thickness of the neck, chest, and tail to match realistic soft tissue. From this, computer programs calculate body volume, mass, and the center of mass, revealing where the animal's weight truly balanced many millions of years ago. That balance point is crucial. A center of mass too far forward would force Iguanodon onto all fours, too far back, and the tail would need to swing like a counterweight. By shifting limb positions and tail angles in the model, researchers can test how small changes in anatomy alter posture. Which stance keeps the body stable with minimal muscular effort? Which requires constant, powerful corrections that would be impossible to sustain. Muscles invisible in the fossils themselves are reconstructed through subtle marks on the bones. Along the thigh, hip, and tail vertebrae, scientists have identified roughened patches and ridges that served as muscle attachment sites. These scars outline the origins and insertions of major muscle groups, such as the strong caudofemoral muscles that pulled the hind limbs backward. By mapping their size and orientation, researchers estimate cross-sectional area and potential force, turning faint textures in the rock into a guide for limb strength and range of motion. With a muscle digital skeleton in place, computer simulations begin. In virtual trials, Iguanodon is made to walk, trot, or rear up, while software tracks forces through each joint. Some postures distribute stress smoothly along the legs and spine. Others drive loads to dangerous peaks, suggesting that those gaits would have damaged cartilage or even fractured bones. In this way, extreme museum-style poses can be rejected as mechanically unrealistic, while more modest, grounded stances gain support from hard evidence showing that the joints could actually withstand them. To keep these reconstructions honest, scientists compare their digital iguanodon to living animals. Large birds with their upright hind limbs and balancing tails provide one of the most informative parallels. Crocodiles offer another window into muscle arrangement and joint motion in sprawling relatives. Even horses and rhinoceroses, although very different dinosaurs in their own right, help set reasonable limits on speed, stride length, and energy use in a heavy herbivore sharing a similar environment. Yet despite the scanning, the equations, and the powerful simulations, every model remains a hypothesis. What happens when a new skeleton preserves unexpected muscle scars, or a fresh method reshapes the center of mass yet again? The next challenge comes when those elegant digital iguanodon collide with the stubborn reality of new fossils. Those collisions have already happened many times before. Few dinosaurs show this more clearly than Iguanodon, whose scientific image has been broken and rebuilt again and again. Each version looked confident. Each version, in time, was proven wrong. The earliest mistake was simple but dramatic. The famous thumb spike, placed proudly on the nose as a horn. With only scattered bones and teeth, scientists had little to guide them, and the horned reptile seemed reasonable. Only later, when articulated skeletons from sites like Dinosaur preserved the hand bones locked together, did the spike finally return to its true place. It was not a decorative nose weapon, but a strong defensive tool on the thumb. The body followed a similar path. In the mid-1800s, Iguanodon was rebuilt as a heavy, rhino-like animal, walking on 4 sturdy legs with a thick, drooping tail resting on the ground. That pose matched the limited fossils and the belief that giant reptiles must be slow and lumbering. Then the Dinosaur fossils arrived in astonishing numbers. Scientists have described around 30 nearly complete skeletons from that mine, some preserved almost as they fell. Their hips, tails, and limb joints showed a very different animal. The tail was stiffened by long bony tendons, forming a powerful, springy structure that could not bend enough to act as a third leg. The joints of the hind limbs pointed to a more upright, dynamic stance, with the body balanced over strong back legs and the forelimbs used more flexibly. Biomechanical studies and better comparative anatomy, using living animals as guides, added further evidence showing that the old tripod pose simply did not work. The elegant statues had to be wrong. Even the idea of Iguanodon as a sluggish grazer was overturned. Its deep skull, strong jaw muscles, and tightly packed grinding teeth formed one of the most efficient chewing systems known among early large herbivorous dinosaurs. Trackways and bone beds suggested movement in groups, reacting to a changing environment and to dangerous predators. Instead of a plodding reptile, Iguanodon begins to look like one of the most active and adaptable plant eaters of its time. Taken together, these changes make Iguanodon a case study in scientific self-correction. Each error was not erased by opinion or authority, but by new fossils, better methods, and harder questions. What happens when a single articulated hand shows the spike cannot be a horn? What happens when tail tendons and hip joints refuse to match a favored pose? The model changes and the confidence is rebuilt on stronger ground. This long record has played an important role in shaping modern paleontology's caution. Scientists separate hard data from speculation, show multiple plausible poses, and openly discuss uncertainty ranges. Far from undermining trust, Iguanodon's shifting form shows why science becomes more reliable over time. It keeps admitting its own mistakes and then uses new evidence to correct them. And this restless process does not stop with skeletons. The next question reaches beyond bones, into skin, color, and behavior, where the limits of evidence become even sharper. Those limits become even more visible when Iguanodon steps out of the laboratory and into the public imagination. For more than a century and a half, this single plant eater has been one of the most familiar dinosaurs on Earth. Yet its image has changed almost as dramatically as its skeleton. The story begins in stone. In the 1850s, the Crystal Palace Park in London unveiled life-sized concrete models of the first known dinosaurs, including Iguanodon. These statues, designed under Richard Owen's direction, showed horn-nosed, rhino-bodied beasts, heavy and low, with sprawling limbs and thick, rounded bodies. The famous thumb spike sat on the nose as a horn, and the tail dragged on the ground. For Victorian visitors, this was not just art. It was science made visible. These powerful stone animals played an important role in fixing the idea that dinosaurs were giant, lumbering reptiles from many millions of years ago. As the 19th century turned into the 20th, that image began to travel into books, posters, and early films. Children's dinosaur books showed Iguanodon standing upright like a living tripod, balancing on its tail with its back almost vertical. Silent movies and early stop-motion productions followed the same pattern, portraying it as a slow, tail-dragging giant that moved more like an overgrown kangaroo than a dynamic herd animal. Scientists had new fossils from Dinosaur and other sites, but much of the popular art still echoed the Crystal Palace poses, even as the details of the skull and hands slowly improved. By the late 20th century, a major shift was underway. Evidence showing that Iguanodon carried its body in a more horizontal posture, with an elevated tail and strong hind limbs, began to reshape both museums and media. Skeletons were remounted in active walking poses. Documentaries used computer animation to place Iguanodon in large herds, moving across floodplains, rearing to feed, and swinging their heavy tails for balance. The thumb spike, once a nose horn, became a clear defensive weapon, shown jabbing at attacking predators. Modern children's media echoed this, presenting Iguanodon as a social, alert animal, living in complex environments rather than a lonely swamp monster. Across these eras, each version of Iguanodon reveals as much about human fears and hopes as it does about fossils. The Crystal Palace giants reflected an industrial age fascinated by massive machines and strong, slow power. Early 20th century illustrations turned Iguanodon into a kind of living statue, impressive but stiff, matching a view of nature as unchanging. Recent portrayals focus on behavior, senses, and social life, in line with an age that values ecosystems, intelligence, and interaction. Scientists have even used herd reconstructions and trackway evidence to explore how these animals might have coordinated movement and responded to danger. If Iguanodon helped invent dinosaurs in the public mind, what does its changing image reveal about the kinds of dinosaurs that inspire fear and the ones that quietly earn sympathy? And as the next layer of evidence turns from stone to skin and color, how much further could that image still change? For millions of years, giant dinosaurs gathered around rivers and lakes to drink, rest, and watch for danger. Some were peaceful plant eaters, but others were powerful hunters that turned these quiet waterholes into deadly arenas. In this ancient theater, Iguanodon was not a horned titan or an armored tank, yet it carried its own kind of strength. Imagine a warm, humid morning in early Cretaceous Europe, many millions of years ago. A mixed-age herd of Iguanodon approaches a shrinking pool at the edge of a floodplain. Heavy adults move first, their strong hind limbs placing wide three-toed tracks in the mud, followed by subadults and smaller juveniles. The environment is rich with ferns and low shrubs, but open ground near the water also exposes every animal to watching eyes hidden among the trees. At the forest edge, a large theropod lurks in the shade. It is one of the most dangerous hunters of its time, with long blade-like teeth and a skull built for slashing flesh and spilling blood. Scientists have found fossils of similar predators with healed injuries, evidence showing that hunting big herbivores carried serious risks. This predator studies the herd, searching for weakness rather than charging blindly. As the scent and movement of the carnivore reach the Iguanodon, the herd reacts. Adults shift position, swinging on their powerful hind legs to form a loose ring, broad tails held stiff as living counterweights. The famous thumb spikes angle forward as the hands rotate slightly inward, turning what once was mistaken for a nose horn into a forest of short, sharp lances. Smaller animals funnel toward the center, shielded by heavier bodies and a wall of muscle and bone. The theropod does not rush in. Instead, it walks along the outer arc of the herd, testing the edges. Its head dips and rises, measuring distance, watching for a juvenile that strays too far or an adult that hesitates. Every step is a calculation. A single deep stab from a thumb spike into the leg, or a crushing impact from several tons of trampling feet, could shatter bones and end a hunting career. Is this herd worth that price? In many confrontations, the answer would likely be no. Coordinated adults, standing shoulder to shoulder, could lunge with their spikes, lash with their heavy tails, and even rear up to bring their full weight down on an attacker that came too close. Such defenses did not turn Iguanodon into a predator, but they made attacking it a bad bet. Faced with the chance of serious injury, even the deadliest hunters often chose easier prey. This balance between risk and reward played an important role in shaping ancient ecosystems. Predators probed for weakness, while herds like Iguanodons survived through vigilance, numbers, and the threat of painful retaliation. But how can scientists move from this thought experiment to firmer ground? And what traces of real conflict remain locked in teeth marks and broken bones? To understand those traces, it helps to step back and ask a simple question. How dangerous could a plant eater really be? In a world filled with powerful predators, herds like Iguanodons did not survive by being harmless. Their bodies, built to process vegetation, were also turned into moving fortresses and weapons. Iguanodon's main visible weapon was the famous thumb spike. Short, thick, and sharply pointed, it sat on a strong hand that could flex, brace, and stab. Scientists have suggested it could be driven into the flesh of an attacking theropod at close range, especially if the animal reared back on its hind limbs. Combined with a heavy tail, strong legs, and the ability to shift between 2 and 4 feet, this dinosaur could strike, pivot, and retreat with surprising speed. Other herbivores took a very different path. Ankylosaurs wrapped their entire bodies in bony plates, with rows of fused armor locked into the skin. At the end of the tail, some species carried massive clubs of solid bone. These animals did not need to rear up and stab. They swung their tails like living sledgehammers. One accurate hit to a predator's legs or ribs could shatter bones and end a hunt in seconds. Ceratopsians, such as Triceratops, used yet another strategy. Their skulls grew into great shields with long brow horns and a wide frill over the neck. The front of the body became a wedge of bone and horn, that could meet a charge head-on. Evidence showing that many ceratopsian skulls carry healed punctures suggests that these horns were used with real force, either against predators or in clashes with rivals. Each group turned a plant-eating frame into a dangerous obstacle. Ankylosaurs specialized in blunt force, breaking bones with tail clubs. Ceratopsians specialized in stabbing, driving horns into soft tissue. Iguanodon stood between these extremes. Its defense relied on versatility, mobility instead of heavy armor, a thumb spike instead of giant horns, and herd formations instead of a single massive shield. Scientists have found trackways and mass bone beds that hint at Iguanodon moving in groups. A herd of medium-sized herbivores, able to bunch together, present dozens of kicking legs, stabbing thumbs, and heavy tails. In formation, they became one of the most unpredictable barriers a predator could face. The danger came not from one huge blow, but from many smaller strikes delivered in rapid succession. This pattern is familiar in the modern world. Wildebeest form dense herds where sheer numbers and constant movement protect the weak. Cape buffalo, with strong bodies and sharp horns, have been recorded driving lions away and even killing them. Musk oxen form tight defensive circles, horns facing outward, turning plant eaters into a living wall. Some of the most dangerous animals in present ecosystems are not hunters at all. So what does this say about dangerous dinosaurs? It challenges the idea that danger flowed only from predator to prey. In Iguanodon's world, danger was a network. Every approach carried risk. Every attack could be punished, and the line between hunter and hunted was far more blurred than it first appears. The fossils that record these clashes reveal that story in unexpected ways. Those clashes between hunter and hunted were not only written in ancient bone, they were also uncovered by the engines of a very different kind of power. In the 19th century, as Britain and Belgium raced through the industrial age, the ground itself was torn open on a scale never seen before. Coal mines, railway cuttings, and deep quarries sliced through rock that had been sealed for many millions of years. In earlier centuries, most fossils came from riverbanks, sea cliffs, or small pits, but industrial excavation changed everything. Railway builders carved long, straight wounds across the countryside, exposing layered cliffs of clay, sandstone, and limestone. Coal mining drove shafts and galleries down through thick seams and into older beds. These operations did not search for dinosaurs, yet they constantly brought strange bones, teeth, and impressions of plants to the surface. The industrial landscape became one of the most productive fossil hunting tools in history. Iguanodon's story is tightly bound to this new world. In Britain, the same Wealden rocks that fueled brickworks and construction also yielded the scattered bones that first suggested a powerful, reptile-like plant eater. In Belgium, at Dinosaur, miners digging for coal in 1878 broke into a steep, waterlogged cavity more than 300 meters underground. Inside lay a mass grave of iguanodon skeletons, stacked and jumbled, preserved with extraordinary detail. Without the mine, that ancient catastrophe would have remained forever hidden. This connection carried a deep irony. The fossil fuels that drove steam engines, smelted iron, and expanded empires were themselves the compressed remains of long-vanished ecosystems. As miners hauled up coal formed from ancient forests, they sometimes lifted the bones of the dinosaurs that had walked among those forests. Scientists have pointed out that the very process that transformed the human environment also revealed direct evidence showing that Earth had once been ruled by very different life. Industrial power was matched by imperial ambition. In London, Brussels, Paris, and other capitals, new museums and scientific societies competed to display the largest and most spectacular fossils. Mounted skeletons of Iguanodon became symbols of national prestige, proof that a modern empire could also command the deep past. At world fairs and great exhibitions, towering reconstructions stood beside machines, engines, and colonial displays, linking dinosaurs to progress, technology, and global reach. Yet the path from pit to pedestal was marked by inequality. Working-class miners and quarrymen were often the first to see unusual bones emerge from the rock face. They carried them to overseers or local collectors, sometimes for a small reward, sometimes for nothing at all. Elite scientists then named the species, wrote the papers, and built careers on those finds. Their names entered history. The miners' names were usually lost. This tension shaped how nature itself was presented. Dinosaurs like Iguanodon were framed as trophies of industrial and imperial power, as if the deep past had been conquered like a colony or a coal field. What does it mean when a peaceful plant eater from the early Cretaceous becomes a monument in a Victorian Hall of Empire? It means that Iguanodon's story is not only prehistoric, it is entangled with human power, technology, and the changing ways that scientists and societies choose to see the natural world. And that entanglement would only grow deeper in the decades to come. In that sense, Iguanodon became more than a fossil in a glass case. It became a mirror, reflecting how each generation chose to picture the ancient world and how certain those pictures felt at the time. Every major reconstruction of this dinosaur arrived with confidence, with the quiet belief that this time the puzzle was finally complete. In the early Victorian period, the Crystal Palace statues showed Iguanodon as a massive, reptilian rhinoceros, sprawling and heavy, its famous spike mounted proudly on the nose. That image dominated museums and public parks, and for decades it seemed settled. Later, after the Dinosaur mine revealed articulated skeletons standing upright, scientists broke that vision apart. The spike moved to the thumb. The posture shifted to a stiff, kangaroo-like tail, and once again there was a sense that the animal had at last been understood. By the late 20th century, the story changed yet again. New studies of joints, muscle scars, and tailbones pulled Iguanodon down from its tripod stance and set it on all fours or in a flexible horizontal pose. Herd behavior was inferred from those mass graves in Belgium and from trackways showing groups moving together. Each time, scientists had strong reasons, detailed measurements, and evidence showing that the new version was more accurate than the last. Each time, it still turned out to be only part of the truth. This raises a powerful question. Looking at modern reconstructions of dinosaurs, which details feel most likely to change next? The basic skeletons, built from solid bones and repeated across many fossils, are probably among the most secure elements. But skin color, patterns, display structures such as crests, dewlaps, or inflatable sacks, and even social behavior are far more fragile. These aspects often rest on comparisons with birds and reptiles, on small traces in the rock, and on educated inference about how animals interacted with their environment many millions of years ago. A single discovery can act as a shock. An exceptional soft tissue fossil might show a sail on a back that was thought to be smooth, or long filaments where only scales were expected. Chemical traces in feathers and skin can preserve direct evidence of coloration, suddenly revealing stripes, countershading, or bright patches used in display. New mass graves could freeze behavior in action. Herds surrounding juveniles, mixed age groups fleeing a flood, or even predators and herbivores preserved together in a final violent moment. Here, the pattern interrupt is clear. Changing science is often treated as a weakness, as if every revision means the earlier work was simply wrong. Iguanodon shows a different story. Each reconstruction played an important role, pushing methods forward, forcing better questions, and turning rough guesses into testable ideas. Scientific illustrations and documentaries are not final answers. They are informed snapshots, built from the best available evidence, and always ready to be replaced when stronger evidence appears. That constant willingness to change is one of the most powerful engines behind paleontology's greatest discoveries, and it will shape the next chapter in Iguanodon's story as clearly as it shaped the first. That same willingness to change also reveals why Iguanodon became far more than just another fossil in a museum case. In the early 1800s, when only scattered bones were known, Gideon Mantel's plant-eating giant and two other strange reptiles, Megalosaurus and Hylaeosaurus, formed the core of a completely new idea. Richard Owen gathered these animals together, compared their strong limb bones and heavy vertebrae, and in 1842 named a whole new group, Dinosauria. For the first time, there was a word for these giant land-dwelling reptiles that had ruled the ancient world many millions of years ago. Iguanodon, with its massive hind limbs and unusual teeth, became one of the most important reference points. Scientists have described how Owen used it as a model for what a dinosaur should be: a powerful terrestrial creature, not a crocodile of the swamps or a marine lizard of the open sea. That early definition shaped every new discovery that followed. The first life-size reconstructions at Crystal Palace in the 1850s turned that definition into something the public could see. The models of Iguanodon were built like reptilian rhinoceroses, heavy-bodied, sprawling, with the famous thumb spike placed as a horn on the nose. These concrete giants stood in a peaceful park, but they carried a powerful message. If one plant eater looked like this, did that mean all dinosaurs were slow, thick-skinned monsters that dragged themselves across the landscape? For decades, the answer in the public mind was yes. Paintings, books, and early scientific illustrations copied the Crystal Palace pose, repeating the same errors. The environment of the Mesozoic was imagined as a world of sluggish failures, doomed to be replaced by more advanced mammals. Yet deep inside the fossils, there was already evidence showing that this picture was wrong. The limb joints were more upright, the tailbones were stiffened, and the thumb spike clearly belonged on the hand, not the face. The turning point came from underground. The Dinosaur mine in Belgium, with its mass grave of around 30 Iguanodon, forced scientists to reconsider everything. Mounted in dynamic, semi-upright poses, with balanced tails and forelimbs ready to move, these skeletons showed a herd-living animal capable of shifting from 4 legs to 2. This was not a passive grazer waiting for predators. It was an active participant in its environment, equipped with a powerful beak, tightly packed grinding teeth, and a strong thumb weapon. Correcting Iguanodon's posture and anatomy helped push paleontology toward a new vision of dinosaurs as energetic, adaptable animals. The same fossils that once supported the idea of clumsy reptiles were reread to reveal agile, responsive creatures, closer in spirit to large mammals or birds than to lumbering lizards. That shift did not happen instantly, but Iguanodon played an important role at every stage, from the first mistaken horn to the rebalanced skeleton. In museums, its influence only grew, from the Crystal Palace Park to the towering Dinosaur mounts in Brussels and their many casts around the world. Generations have learned what dinosaurs are by standing beneath Iguanodon. Its silhouette, its teeth, even its pose have acted as a template for the entire group. But what happens when the very first template is flawed? If one plant eater could shape the image of all dinosaurs for more than a century, what does that say about the power and the danger of first impressions in science? For many millions of years, giant dinosaurs shaped their worlds in ways far more complex than simple hunting and killing. Some were peaceful plant eaters, but others were powerful hunters that filled the ancient world with fear. Yet danger in these ancient ecosystems was not carried only in sharp teeth and slicing claws. It also lived in herds of heavy-bodied plant eaters that refused to be easy prey. Modern images of danger often begin and end with predators like Tyrannosaurus rex or packs of fast, sickle-clawed raptors. These deadly hunters had strong jaws, sharp teeth, and incredible speed, and they dominated popular imagination. But in a real ecosystem, the most dangerous animals are not always the ones doing the chasing. they can also be the ones that make every attack a costly gamble. Iguanodon is one of the most important examples of this hidden kind of power. It did not slice flesh like a Carcharodontosaur, and it did not crush bones like T-Rex. Yet it played an important role in its environment. With a body as long as a bus, a deep muscular tail, and a mass that could rival modern rhinos or small elephants, a single adult iguanodon was not a simple target. A herd of them was something else entirely. Scientists have found evidence showing that Iguanodon lived and likely moved in groups, especially at sites like the Dinosaur mine in Belgium, where many skeletons were buried together. A herd of large plant eaters can dominate open ground, control access to water, and strip vegetation from wide areas. This reshapes the environment, forcing predators and smaller herbivores to adjust their movements and feeding patterns. In this way, Iguanodon did not just survive inside its ecosystem, it helped set the rules. Its body carried several features that turned it into a difficult and dangerous meal. The famous thumb spike, once mistaken for a nose horn, was a short, strong weapon positioned where it could be driven into the flesh of an attacking carnivore. Powerful forelimbs, a robust chest, and a low center of gravity meant that an iguanodon that stood its ground could deliver serious damage. Even a successful predator risked broken bones, deep wounds, and death from infection. At the same time, its head and jaws formed a different kind of arsenal. A tough beak at the front and a battery of grinding teeth behind allowed it to process a wide range of plants efficiently. Scientists have found fossils with dense tooth wear, evidence showing that Iguanodon could handle tough, fibrous vegetation that many rivals might avoid. Efficient feeding meant faster growth, stronger adults, and herds that could maintain high numbers over long periods. In this sense, Iguanodon functioned much like modern elephants or bison. These are not hunters, yet they command space, knock down trees, churn soil, and can be deadly when threatened. Predators think carefully before attacking a healthy adult elephant. The risk is simply too high. Many millions of years ago, a confident predator facing a herd of Iguanodon likely faced the same calculation. So in a world of tooth and claw, what does most dangerous really mean? It may not belong only to the hunter with the sharpest teeth, but to the plant eater that turns every attack into a gamble and quietly engineers the landscape around it. And Iguanodon was far from alone in this silent arms race. In the modern world, the closest echoes of Iguanodon are not found in museums, but on open plains and frozen tundra. For millions of years, great herds of plant-eating animals have marched across landscapes, stripping vegetation, trampling soil, and feeding entire communities of predators that shadow their movements. Scientists have long compared this ancient herbivore to the vast migrations of wildebeest in Africa or caribou in the Arctic. In those systems, hundreds of thousands of bodies move like a living river, eating down grasses, breaking branches, and fertilizing the ground. Lions, hyenas, wolves, and bears follow them because the herds are one of the most reliable sources of food in the entire environment. Iguanodon likely played a similar role many millions of years ago. Large groups of these dinosaurs, with strong legs and deep chests, would have moved between feeding grounds, shaping patches of forest and floodplain in their wake. Evidence showing that related ornithopods formed age-mixed herds suggests that predators did not just hunt individuals, they hunted the system tied to those herds, just as modern carnivores depend on wildebeest or caribou. When danger approached, Iguanodon probably did not scatter in panic. Its behavior may have resembled Cape buffalo facing lions on the savanna. Those powerful mammals formed tight circles, horns pointed outward, turning the herd itself into a weapon. Musk oxen in the north do something similar, building a living wall of bodies and sharp horns to confront wolves. The thumb spike and muscular shoulders of Iguanodon hint at a parallel strategy. Instead of horns, it carried short but deadly spikes on its hands, backed by strong bones and heavy muscles. In a defensive ring, adults on the outer edge could have lowered their heads, braced their tails, and presented a forest of stabbing thumbs toward any attacking predator. A charging carnivore would not only face trampling feet and heavy tails, but a line of concentrated, directed force. Modern ecologists describe animals like wildebeest, caribou, and Cape buffalo as keystone species. Their presence or their sudden loss transforms entire ecosystems. Remove the herds, and grasslands change into shrubland. Predators decline, rivers and soils shift. Add them back, and the landscape reorganizes around their movements and feeding. By using this concept, scientists have begun to see Iguanodon not just as a single dinosaur, but as a keystone of its Cretaceous world. Studying how living herds alter fire patterns, nutrient cycles, and predator behavior gives paleontologists working with fossils a powerful toolkit for reconstructing ancient systems. Fossil trackways, bite-marked bones, and plant remains can be tested against living patterns, turning scattered evidence into dynamic models of real behavior. Here the story shifts. Once Iguanodon is viewed through the lens of wildebeest, caribou, buffalo, and musk oxen, it stops looking like a distant movie monster. It becomes a knowable, if still formidable, part of Earth's story. An animal that engineered its environment, defended its young, and forced predators to think twice. But if this dinosaur can be brought so close, what does that mean for the humans who first tried to imagine it from a handful of teeth and bones? Their first guesses came from scattered teeth and bones, but the end of Iguanodon's story is written in absence. For millions of years in the early Cretaceous, this powerful plant eater filled riverside forests and coastal plains. Then, without any asteroid, supervolcano, or sudden global firestorm, it simply fades from the fossil record. Its disappearance is quieter, but in many ways, more unsettling. Scientists have strong evidence showing that classic Iguanodon lived and died out long before the famous end Cretaceous catastrophe. The last clear remains of true Iguanodon-type animals come from the early Cretaceous, roughly 125 to 110 million years ago. The asteroid that ended most non-bird dinosaurs struck about 66 million years ago. That means tens of millions of years separate Iguanodon's final herds from the sky turning to fire. During that long interval, the environment that had once favored Iguanodon changed step by step. Sea levels rose and fell, drowning some lowland habitats under shallow seas, and then exposing them again as muddy coastal flats. Climate patterns shifted, turning stable, humid regions into patchworks of wetter and drier zones. Floodplains that had supported dense, uniform forests became more varied landscapes, where different plants dominated different regions and seasons. Plant life itself was transforming. In Iguanodon's prime, many forests were still ruled by ferns, cycads, and conifers. These plants grew tough leaves and fibrous stems, but Iguanodon's powerful beak and grinding teeth were well suited to handling them. As time passed, flowering plants began to spread. Some stayed low and fast-growing. Others formed new kinds of woodland. This silent botanical revolution altered not just the food on offer, but the timing of growth, the distribution of nutrients, and the way entire ecosystems were structured. In this shifting world, evolutionary competition became one of the most important pressures. Later, ornithopods, close relatives of Iguanodon, started to specialize. Early hadrosaurs, the ancestors of the famous duck-billed dinosaurs, developed even more complex tooth batteries and highly efficient chewing systems. Their jaws could slice and grind plant material with remarkable precision, turning a wide range of vegetation into energy with less effort. In many regions, these new forms filled the same general niche that Iguanodon had once dominated. Extinction in such a context is rarely about being weak, slow, or poorly armed. It is often about being slightly less efficient or less adaptable than rivals that exploit the same resources. If a hadrosaur-like animal could process tougher leaves faster, raise young more quickly, or cope better with seasonal shortages, it gained a small advantage. Over thousands of generations, those small advantages accumulate. Populations of iguanodon-like dinosaurs shrink, retreat to scattered refuges, and eventually vanish, leaving only distant cousins to carry the lineage forward. In the end, Iguanodon's world ended not with a bang, but with a slow reshuffling of climate, coastlines, and competitors. Its story shows that even one of the most successful plant eaters can be edged out by gradual change. So if a giant that once engineered its environment can disappear without a single dramatic impact, what does that suggest about a modern world reshaping itself far faster than any ancient sea or forest? For millions of years, herds of iguanodontian dinosaurs shaped ancient landscapes. Yet the very name that began their story has become one of the most debated labels in paleontology. The classic Iguanodon that seemed so solid in Victorian halls has fractured into a complex family of lookalikes, close cousins, and imposters hiding in plain sight. When the first fossils were described, almost any medium to large plant-eating dinosaur with similar teeth and bones could be placed into Iguanodon. It was a broad container, useful at first, but dangerously vague. As more complete skeletons emerged from England, Belgium, and later across Europe and beyond, scientists have realized that this single name was carrying too many different animals. Subtle changes in the shape of the snout, the proportions of the limbs, and the arrangement of the hip began to reveal separate lineages that had been forced under one banner. One of the most important splits involved the graceful animal, once called Iguanodon, Atherfieldensis. Detailed study of its lighter frame, longer tail, and more slender forelimbs provided evidence showing that it moved differently from the heavier, deep-bodied Bernissart Iguanodon. In the early 2000s, it was given its own genus, Mantellisaurus, honoring Gideon Mantell himself. This dinosaur still carried the famous thumb spike and strong chewing batteries of teeth, but its more delicate build suggests a faster, perhaps more lightly built browser that shared the same environment as bulkier relatives. Mantellisaurus is only one example. Other former Iguanodon fossils have been reassigned to genera such as Dolodon and Beryllium, while in Spain, discoveries like Iguanodon bernissartensis-like forms and related dinosaurs such as Proa and more derived hadrosaur ancestors show a branching web rather than a single straight line. What once looked like one widespread species marching across Europe many millions of years ago is now seen as a cluster of closely related herbivores, each adapted to slightly different habitats and diets. This raises a central question. How many true Iguanodon species were there? Some scientists argue that only a narrow core, centered on the classic Hibernisaur skeletons, deserves the name. Others see regional variants in England, Belgium, and Spain that might represent distinct species differing in size, skull shape, and the strength of their forelimbs. These differences are not just labels. They hint at how herds divided food resources, how they moved across floodplains, and how they responded to predators in changing environments. New finds continue to complicate the picture. Spanish trackways show herds of medium-sized iguanodontians moving together, while isolated skulls and partial skeletons from England and France blur the boundary between early iguanodon-type animals and later duck-billed forms. Each discovery adds another piece, sometimes supporting older reconstructions, sometimes forcing entire museum mounts to be renamed or reinterpreted. Even the famous Bernissar group has been re-examined, with evidence showing that more than one kind of iguanodontian may be mixed in that mass grave. After nearly 2 centuries, Iguanodon refuses to be reduced to a single tidy species with a single fixed image. Its name opened the age of dinosaurs, but its identity is still being negotiated fossil by fossil, bone by bone. And as this shifting animal continues to be divided and refined, another question emerges. Beyond the labels, what did life inside those restless herds actually look like, moment to moment, on the ground. Beyond the shifting names and revised diagrams, Iguanodon still lives in particular places. It waits in stone, in iron, in glass, turning the abstract idea of dinosaurs back into something that can be walked around, circled, and felt. In London's Crystal Palace Park, the story begins in weathered concrete and moss. Among trees and quiet paths, the famous Victorian Iguanodon sculptures crouch beside the water, their surfaces softened by rain and lichen, their shapes frozen in that old, rhinoceros-like posture. For millions of years, real animals moved and breathed, but here, their 19th century ghosts stand motionless. These are not accurate reconstructions, yet they are one of the most powerful time capsules of early dinosaur science, capturing how artists and scientists imagined this animal before full skeletons were known. The environment around them adds to the effect. Birds move in the branches above, traffic hums in the distance, but at ground level, the stone dinosaurs feel strangely separate, as if occupying a private island of 1850s thinking. The thumb spike sits like a horn, the tail drags, the body is heavy and low. Scientists have long since corrected these mistakes, but the models remain, showing exactly how the first age of dinosaurs in the public mind was built from partial fossils and bold guesses. Far from this park, in Brussels, another chapter stands in ordered ranks. Inside the Royal Belgian Institute of Natural Sciences, the Dinosaur iguanodons rise in a long gallery, mounted almost shoulder to shoulder. Tall iron frames support real bones that once lay tangled more than 300 meters underground. Here, the animal that Crystal Palace misunderstood seems to stand up and answer back. The tails lift clear of the floor, the hands open, the thumb spikes point outward like short, strong daggers. The room itself feels almost like a parade, frozen in mid-step. Light falls across ribs and vertebrae, picking out the fine texture of stone. There is evidence showing that several skeletons share similar postures, hinting at the catastrophic event that buried a herd together. Each mount is both an individual and part of a pattern, turning an abstract idea about herding behavior into a corridor of physical bodies. A pattern interrupt appears the moment a visitor steps beneath them. Diagrams and timelines fade, replaced by the simple fact of scale. Skulls at eye level, hip joints overhead, feet planted where living feet once pressed into Cretaceous mud. These fossils are not just data. They played an important role in rewriting posture, locomotion, and even the placement of that famous spike. Other museums carry pieces of this story as well. Important iguanodontian material stands in London's Natural History Museum, in collections at the Natural History Museum of Brussels beyond the Dinosaur Hall, in French and German institutions that preserve teeth, tracks, and partial skeletons from different environments. Each case and mount holds evidence showing that this broader group was diverse, adaptable, and spread across ancient landscapes many millions of years ago. Standing beneath any of these skeletons means standing under an idea that has already been broken and rebuilt. The same bones that helped invent Dinosauria were later reposed, reinterpreted, and sometimes reassigned. That tension between strong, silent fossils and changing scientific thought raises a final question. If even this founding dinosaur can shift so dramatically, what might a living herd have looked and sounded like in motion, under real Cretaceous skies? In that tension, Iguanodon quietly steps out of the Victorian fog and into focus as something far more formidable. For millions of years, this was not a plaster showpiece or a misposed nose horn, but a living engine of muscle and bone that shaped entire landscapes. Its journey through science has been almost as dramatic as its life in the early Cretaceous. First came scattered teeth that simply looked like those of a giant iguana. Then came the famous nose horn that was not a horn at all, but a misplaced thumb spike. Later, the Dinosaur mine revealed articulated skeletons, locked in death poses that finally showed the true posture of the animal. Step by step, scientists have moved from lumbering rhino statues to modern digital reconstructions that can test its stride, its bite, and even how a herd might have flowed across a floodplain. Those reconstructions reveal a herbivore that was anything but defenseless. Iguanodon carried its security system in plain sight. A heavy body, large enough to deter smaller hunters, long hind limbs capable of bursts of strong ground-eating speed, and a flexible stance that could shift from 4 legs to 2 when power or height was needed. Along each hand, that thick conical thumb spike waited as a close-quarters weapon, while the rest of the fingers could grasp branches or brace during impact. Its skull completed the picture. At the front, a hard beak sliced through tough plant material. Behind it, tightly packed grinding teeth formed a powerful battery, with evidence showing that they could process fibrous vegetation with relentless efficiency. Some fossils preserve heavy wear on those teeth, suggesting a lifetime of chewing that turned resistant plants into fuel. This was not designed to tear flesh, but it was built to dominate its food. In ecological terms, Iguanodon was one of the most important herbivores of its time. Herds of these dinosaurs would have trimmed forests, opened clearings, and recycled vegetation into meat for the predators that followed them. Their bodies fed carnivores in life and in death, while their constant feeding reshaped the environment itself. In this way, they functioned as apex herbivores, not at the top of the food chain in killing power, but at the center of energy flow. The real danger of Iguanodon lay in refusal. It refused to be simple prey, with herd behavior, size, speed, thumb spikes, and jaws that made any attack costly. It refused to yield its food sources, grinding down plants that other dinosaurs could not handle. Many millions of years before famous meat-eaters appeared, this animal had already tested what it meant to be large, successful, and dominant. So when later predators evolved their massive skulls and crushing teeth, whose rules were they really following? Before Tyrannosaurus rex ever took a step, Iguanodon had already written the first draft of what it meant to be a dinosaur. And the closing chapter of that legacy is still being uncovered in stone. By the time those massive jaws and crushing teeth appeared in later predators, something deeper had already changed. Iguanodon had helped create the very idea of dinosaurs in science, and in doing so, it revealed how limited early thinking really was. In the 1800s, scattered fossils of Iguanodon, Megalosaurus, and Hylaeosaurus were pulled from quarries and cliffs. Their strange teeth and heavy bones did not fit any living animal. Richard Owen used this confusion to coin a new category, Dinosauria, turning a handful of puzzling skeletons into one of the most important groups in natural history. Yet the first Iguanodon was drawn as a lumbering reptilian rhino, tail on the ground, horn on its nose, more monster than animal. Each major correction to that image tells a story. When articulated skeletons from Bernissart showed the tail held straight and stiff, it forced scientists to break the old models and rebuild Iguanodon as a more balanced, dynamic creature. When the famous nose horn was proven to be a thumb spike, the imagined charging rhinoceros gave way to a herbivore with a close-quarters weapon, able to jab sideways at predators or rivals. Posture and weaponry shifted together, turning a slow, dragging beast into a strong, active dinosaur. Evidence showing that many Iguanodon died together in that Belgian mine added another layer. Dozens of individuals, preserved in a single catastrophic event, suggested herds rather than loners. Scientists have compared this to modern grazing mammals, where safety comes from numbers, alert eyes, and coordinated movement through the environment. Iguanodon began to look less like a solitary giant and more like a social plant eater, shaping and responding to its ecosystem over millions of years. Its jaws also changed in scientific reconstructions. Early artists focused on size, but later studies of the beak, the grinding teeth, and the reinforced skull showed a powerful chewing machine processing tough vegetation with precision. This was not a mindless brute. It was a specialized herbivore, filling a key role between the plants it consumed and the predators that hunted it, part of a living, dynamic food web. Seen together, these shifts move dinosaurs as a whole from static movie monsters to evolving, complex creatures. Their bodies, behaviors, and environments were linked, just as in modern animals. Iguanodon proves that even the earliest named dinosaurs were not simple symbols of strength or terror, but real organisms adapting to changing worlds many millions of years ago. In this way, the story of Iguanodon mirrors the scientific process itself. Bold early guesses created a framework, spectacular errors exposed its weaknesses, and new fossils slowly pulled the picture toward reality. Every broken tail, every repositioned thumb spike, every new bone bed was a test. What else might still be wrong? That question reaches beyond Iguanodon. Every reconstruction in this series, no matter how detailed, is a hypothesis built from incomplete evidence. Future discoveries may twist tails higher, shrink sails, add feathers, or change entire behaviors. The danger and beauty of these dinosaurs lie not only in their powerful bodies, but in the shifting, unfinished story told in stone. The next chapters in that story will come from other species, other skeletons, and other environments, each one challenging what is thought to be known about life in deep time. Those other species and environments form a vast backdrop, but to end, the focus narrows to ground level. In a single moment, many millions of years ago, the air is heavy with moisture. The light is filtered through broad, fern-like fronds and low conifer branches. The earth itself begins to tremble. A herd of Iguanodon is moving. Each step lands with a deep, steady thud that passes through the soil and into the ribs and leg bones of every animal nearby. Dry leaves crackle under broad feet. Damp plants bend and snap. The sound is not a roar or a crash, but a constant, powerful rhythm, like distant thunder that never quite fades. Close to the center of the herd, adults and juveniles shift around one another. Tough stems are stripped by strong beaks, then fed back to grinding teeth that work in slow, relentless cycles. Scientists have found evidence showing that this dental battery could process very tough vegetation, and in this living scene, the result is clear. Torn branches, shredded leaves, and a low, continuous rasp of chewing that fills the air beneath the forest canopy. From time to time, a low call rolls across the group, deep and resonant, more felt than heard. Another answers from farther away, guiding movement, checking distance, keeping contact. This communication played an important role in holding the herd together across the uneven ground and tangled plants of the early Cretaceous environment. For a moment, the only other sounds are insects, distant water, and the soft rush of bodies brushing against cycads and tree ferns. Then, without warning, the rhythm changes. One adult freezes, heads lift, tails stiffen, the chewing stops. Silence falls so quickly that even the wind seems to hesitate. Somewhere at the tree line, something has moved. A shadow slips between trunks. It could be one of the most dangerous hunters in this landscape, or only a smaller predator testing the edge of the herd. No roar is needed. The response is automatic, built by millions of years of selection. The largest adults step outward, forming a rough line between the threat and the juveniles. Heavy tails brace. Forelimbs spread for balance. Thumb spikes angle forward, short but deadly, ready to drive into soft flesh if the hunter comes too close. For a long breath, nothing happens. A branch twitches. A shape leans, considers, and then withdraws. The shadow melts back into the trees. The tension drains away, slowly at first, then all at once, as heads lower and the powerful rhythm of feeding and walking returns. In that brief pause, these dinosaurs are not monsters or movie creatures. They are animals that feel fear, make choices, and survive, step by step, across changing seasons and shifting rivers. Fossils turn those choices into bones and rock, but the living reality was movement, sound, and risk. Understanding that reality does more than restore Iguanodon, it also reflects a distant mirror back on the present. What does it mean to exist in a world where danger waits at the edge of vision, yet life still pushes forward in herds, flocks, and families? How does a single herbivore, or a single person, fit into Earth's long, dangerous, and beautiful story? The answers begin with scenes like this herd, but they do not end here, because other dinosaurs, other hunters and plant eaters, will push that story into even darker forests and more hostile worlds. For many millions of years, herds like this Iguanodon group stood between hungry predators and the green world that fed them. Some dinosaurs were powerful hunters with strong jaws and slicing teeth, but others, like Iguanodon, turned plant eating into its own form of defense and survival. This raises an important question. What does dangerous really mean for a dinosaur? Iguanodon did not stalk prey or crush bones with a killing bite, yet its story shows that danger can also mean a heavy tail, a sudden charge, and a thumb spike held low and ready. Its beak and grinding teeth turned tough plants into energy that fueled fast movement and herd protection. After hearing how its horn moved from the nose to the hand, how its posture shifted from a lumbering rhino shape to a dynamic herd animal, which part of this journey was the most surprising? Scientists have uncovered layer after layer of misunderstanding around this dinosaur. The Crystal Palace sculptures, the early horn-nosed statues, and the first Dinosaur reconstructions all seemed convincing in their own time. There is evidence showing that each version felt accurate, until new fossils forced a complete change. How many famous dinosaurs in museums and documentaries might look just as wrong 100 years from now, once fresh evidence and better technology reshape their bodies again? This story does not have to stay on a screen. Local museums, regional fossil collections, and digital tours of places like Crystal Palace Park or the Dinosaur Mine allow visitors to stand face to face with the history of these ideas. Skeletons mounted in old poses, display panels that still show tail-dragging stances, and newer reconstructions placed beside them reveal how science moves. Turning passive watching into active exploration makes every gallery, every cast bone, and every reconstructed skull part of a living investigation. Iguanodon was one of the most important dinosaurs in that investigation because it played an important role in creating the very word dinosaur and in shaping public imagination. Yet this series is not only about early plant eaters. Other episodes will follow the great predators that hunted animals like Iguanodon, from heavy-headed tyrannosaurs to blade-toothed carcharodontosaurs and fast, sickle-clawed raptors that tested every defense a herd could offer. Each of those hunters carried special abilities that matched its environment, whether that meant crushing bone, slicing flesh, or using heightened senses to track movement across long distances. Some were giant, others were small but extremely dangerous, and many have already been misunderstood in ways just as dramatic as the horn-nosed Iguanodon. Future discoveries will almost certainly change them again. To follow that changing story of the most dangerous and most surprising dinosaurs to walk the Earth, viewers can like this episode, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. In the same way that early fossils from England and Belgium reshaped Iguanodon, every new discovery will help reveal what these animals truly were and how close current reconstructions are to the living creatures that moved through ancient forests and floodplains.